Okay, it's October 6th, 2022. We're ready to begin the planning board meeting with our preliminary matters. Could I get a motion on adoption of the resolutions?
Jerry Fisher, so moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's approved.
I abstain.
Oh, okay, and Carol will abstain. Approval of the minutes of September 22nd.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. The regulatory extension requests, there's just one on the agenda. Could I get a motion on that?
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. That brings us to the planning director's report.
Thank you. For the record, Gwen Wright, Planning Director. And just before I have a brief PowerPoint presentation for you, but before I do that, I'll just give you an update on many of our projects. We are spending a lot of time at the County Council these days. We are having our, we hope, final work sessions on Thrive Montgomery 2050. We spent most of the day Tuesday of this week in work sessions, both in the morning and the afternoon. The council staff has made a number of, I think, helpful edits that will continue to strengthen the document. And we are expecting the final work sessions and a straw vote on October 11th. Then the final resolution would be on October 25th. So that is moving along. We're also up at the council on our no net loss of trees legislation that we've proposed. There was a public hearing about that on Tuesday and work sessions that are coming up with the T&E committee. We are also at the council with a variety of pieces of legislation to implement the Complete Streets Design Guidelines. And those are in work sessions now with the T&E committee. And so all of the month of October is going to be very, very busy at the council. In terms of our ongoing projects, you're going to hear today about the Rustic Roads project. Farrell and Briggs Cheney is planning their great placemaking event. We're going to talk about that in my PowerPoint presentation. The Farrell and Briggs Cheney folks are sharing some of their initial recommendations that they shared with you last week with different community groups. I believe they were at the East County Citizens Advisory Group yesterday sharing some of their recommendations and getting input from the community. We also are starting other master plans, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit in my PowerPoint, but we are continuing on a very busy, very active work program.
That's Dan Sherry.
So why don't we go ahead and start the PowerPoint presentation? What I wanted to do in this PowerPoint presentation is really talk about a little
He's a good guy.
the fact that we are out in the community all the time. You all hear about some of our efforts, but you maybe have not seen or heard of other efforts. And so I want to sort of celebrate our great staff. We took this picture, many of you remember, just before, I think it was just before the August break, if I'm not mistaken. In any case, we are out in the community, and the staff is really, really committed to community outreach. Next slide, please. To that end, I'm really proud, and again, I think most of you are aware of this, is that the National Capital Area chapter of APA gave the planning group 2 awards, and one of those awards is for community outreach. It is the Harold Foster Award for Outreach and Engagement, and it was awarded for the work that our team did on Thrive Montgomery 2050. So you see on the left at the awards ceremony, a lot of the team who was actively involved in the outreach. And on the right, Chair Anderson, who was available to attend the awards ceremony, and it was exciting. In the middle, you see me. I was very honored to receive an award for my leadership in planning, for my many years in this region working on planning issues, and that was very meaningful to me given the fact that I'm retiring soon. So, yay!
Yay me.
Yay me! Next slide, please. What I'm really even more excited about, even beyond the awards, is how many of our staff actually participated by giving presentations at the conference. 5 presentations involved Montgomery planning staff. We talked about everything from how to really integrate equity into our planning efforts, to our neighborhood change study, to our predictive safety analysis, to a specific, really exciting project up in Sandy Spring that converted office buildings to affordable senior housing, which is a project you all reviewed and approved and is really, really interesting. So we had folks from Montgomery Planning talking in many, many sessions about the excellent work that we're doing. Next. Again, just a reminder, Makeover Montgomery was really an opportunity, again, to engage people to talk about the future. We had about 180 people signed up. We had a wonderful speaker who is the incoming president of the National American Planning Association, who really talked about resilient housing, and that was exciting. And you might want to check out our website. We have a great recap video of the conference, which I think covers a lot of the interesting discussions. Next. So these are things that, the last few are things you all probably have heard a lot about. These are some things that you maybe haven't heard about. Our excellent staff in IRC, Christina Sorrento and her staff, organized a retreat regarding the DRC, the Development Review Committee. And we've had retreats with the agency participants. This retreat was actually with the development community, to bring them in and to brainstorm on ways that we could improve the Development Review Committee process. And we got lots of great ideas. We also spent the morning brainstorming ideas and then visited 2 projects in the afternoon. One, the Cabin John Shopping Center, where we've added residential to what was a traditional suburban shopping center. And this other project in the Great Seneca area, which was a biotech project, and one of the representatives of Alexandria Real Estate came and spoke about biotech development in Montgomery County. So I think that was really interesting for all the participants. Next. We had Parking Day. Again, if you weren't here in Wheaton, there was a wonderful celebration in late September of Parking Day. Not only was there booths set up on the parking lot behind the building, but our staff actually retrofitted and reconverted a on-street parking space to a mini parklet with, grass, albeit not real grass, chairs, tables, games, and we had a lot of folks stop by to observe what was happening. Next. We have been at farmers markets and other kinds of events to promote all of our planning efforts. This is the Tacoma Park Minor Master Plan Amendment at the Tacoma Park Farmers Market to talk about that plan. Next. This is staff who came to the Wheaton Arts Parade and set up and staffed a booth to talk about the University Boulevard Corridor Plan, which is just getting ready to kick off, as well as other projects that we're doing. Next. This is a booth about the Wheaton Downtown Study at another Wheaton event. So we are hitting all of the festivals, all of the events, trying to have our ubiquitous blue table cover shows up everywhere. And again, you'll see as we go through this, it's different staff at every one of these events. I mean, we're really using every staff person in the department to get out there and be in the community and talk to folks. Next. One thing I wanted to share is, again, we're kicking off the Great Seneca Plan, which is an update to the Great Seneca Science Corridor Plan. We've renamed it the Great Seneca Plan Connecting Life and Science. And not only have we been out there setting up booths and talking to people about the kickoff of this plan, but we also did a ULI technical advisory panel. For those of you who aren't aware, ULI has a service where they will bring in experts to study and provide recommendations on a specific planning issue. And we're doing 2 different ULI technical advisory panels this fiscal year. The first one was for the Great Seneca Plan, and I know that Commissioner Sishi attended the report out on that, but we're really excited about this plan. We're excited about some of the ideas from the ULI Technical Advisory Panel. I don't know if anyone has heard this, but in the recent CBRE report in June, it listed Washington, D.C., Baltimore region as the number 2 out of the top 25 life science research talent clusters, which is very, very impressive. And this particular plan area has 7,000 life science jobs, which is twice the number of the life science jobs in all of Montgomery County. It is really the hub. And the recommendations from the ULI Technical Advisory Panel really focused on, they met with stakeholders, including community members as well as property owners, but they talked about some of the challenges. There's a lot of there are a lot of recommendations about making a more connected Great Seneca area and about branding and advancing the implementation. The full report will be available later this month, and thanks to particularly Maren Hill and Aaron Savage, who really, from the Mid-County team, who really helped organize this event. Next. Fairland Briggs Cheney, again, amazing outreach, everything from, as you all have heard, door knocking to being at a variety of community events, really collaborating with the East County Citizens Advisory Group. I want to shout out to Jaru Banda, who has been an incredible partner in this effort. And we are really, really grateful that we're getting a lot of great input, that some of which was reflected in the recommendations that you heard last week. Next. So I want to sort of, one more way we're out in the community. I'm retiring. Some of you may have heard that. So we're actually going on a series of, I guess you could call them sort of walkabouts in different parts of the county with our staff. And I'm wired up with a little recorder. And I'm basically telling my stories about different parts of the county, how they redeveloped. I'm trying to pass on this sort of institutional knowledge, really early stories about the redevelopment of White Flint, how we came up with the idea of having a taxing district, how the community came together to create Friends of White Flint. A lot of things that our newer staff just really don't know. So we're going to have these kinds of events this was the first one, which we had this past Monday, but we're going to have them in places as diverse as Bethesda, Clarksburg, the Ag Reserve, West Bard, a whole range. We're going to do about 6 or 7 of these, where I will walk around with staff, tell my stories, provide that institutional memory of some of the things that happened to make the places the way they are today, record it all for posterity. And the other thing I promised I was going to do is I was going to make a list of all the planning directors since the 1970s, because I don't think anyone knows that whole list. Or the folks who do know it, there are very few and far between of us who do. So
who was Irwin Root?
He was an early planner who helped lay out some of the sort of plans in the 20s and 30s. And there's a great image that he did of Jessup Blair Park that I think we have hanging in our historic preservation area. He was before my time. Him I didn't know.
Well, I just say that because his name is all over all these early plans, and I tried Googling him, and you don't really find, he's mentioned a couple documents, but hard to say.
Yeah.
The other thought about that is, I remember Roland told me once that Harlan Bartholomew's firm was involved in the 64 plan, which is kind of interesting because, Bartholomew was a big, auto-oriented highway suburban type of guy. But some of the ideas in that general plan were very progressive and not necessarily in line with that. I guess that would have been really late in his career, and I don't think he was probably personally engaged in working with Montgomery County. But it's just interesting I think you're onto something of like looking into some of these people who were influential in the history of land use in the county.
Yeah, and someone jokingly said, Royce wrote his book, Suburb, which took up to a certain point, and joked that my retirement project should be like Suburb Part 2, sort of picking up where Royce left off and like telling, the story up through the present. So anyway, it's an idea, something to keep me busy. But I wanted to end with the next image, which is more things coming up. Kojo in our community. Chair Anderson is going to be on the panel for that. Walktober 4, which is, again, I'm very proud that the state of Maryland really celebrates Walktober, and our staff, you see David Ansbacher and Jesse McGowan, who I do have to report, sadly, has moved to New Jersey. So Jessie, her last day was at the end of last week, and she is moved to New Jersey to be closer to family. But I think, maybe she's still going to help us with this one presentation. But it's, again, it's exciting to be in a state where walkability is such an important idea. Next. So I wanted to end with a focus on one of our really, really big activities coming up, our placemaking event in Fairland Briggs Cheney. This is the first time we will have done a placemaking event during the time we're working on a master plan. So we've always sort of done them after a master plan had already been completed. So this will be fun. It will be an opportunity to engage the community. Come out, be there on Friday the 21st and Saturday the 22nd. And if you're interested in working with the community to help set up and build some of the items with our consultant Better Block, you can let us know, and we're going to have community build days on October 19th and 20th. But the actual festival is the 21st and 22nd, and we really encourage not just the board, but everyone who's listening to come and talk about the great ideas for transforming the Farrell and Briggs Cheney area. So with that, that is the end of my director's report, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
Hearing no questions?
I do. WMAL site, and this is the product of all your effort in planning. So just maybe you put that in your file with the, if you pass it down, take a look at that, what was accomplished there.
Thank
So,
you. That's
great.
a project I am really, really proud
Right.
of.
Very well
Thank
done,
you.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to suggest like the Amalin site. I think is what he's referring to with I think it's Tri Point Homes and Toll Brothers. In that same spirit, I think it'd be great to see, since there is so much amazing work going on, that sometimes we plan and then we don't always follow up on presenting to the public how it was implemented. So I would love to see, especially in the life sciences side, you know, I read recently that I know our numbers are closer to 6 or 7% vacancy, but Washington Business Journal just reported a 1% vacancy for life sciences in the Gaithersburg area, which is phenomenal. Not to mention, about 1 million square feet have been converted from office to actual life science spaces. So if going forward, if you can pick 1 or 2 slides of projects that we are really excited about that are now starting to become implemented, I think sometimes, to your previous points, we don't stop and celebrate our achievements. There are incredible projects that now are finally happening in Bethesda, that are happening in Up County. Many of them have been in the pipeline for a while, but now they're actually being executed. So it'd be great to just get updates on that, just so the public knows that these aren't kind of theoretical exercises.
Jerry Session, one other comment on the life science. I did, as you mentioned, I did attend that. I think that was a great presentation. If it's that dynamic, the transit studies you're doing, there's one where you're looking at extension of metro, perhaps to downtown Gaithersburg, but maybe that's an option to look at the 370 right away, whether that could be extended out in that direction and maybe provide, because there is a range of employees, there's PhDs there, but there's also like 2-year graduates from Montgomery College that need transit access to that site. So coming from perhaps down county, that might be something to look at in the transit studies you're looking at.
That's a great idea. And I do want to actually give a shout out. We had the ULI Technical Advisory Panel at the new Universities of Shady Grove Research Building, which won one of our Design Excellence Awards last year. It is an amazing building. And while we were there, we walked past, you know, classrooms where students were using all sorts of scientific equipment, where they were, you know, talking to each other in small, groups, you know, small classes, I guess, is my point, not big lecture classes. And it's amazing. I walked through there and it felt like I was on, you know, in the highest level, highest quality academic environments I've ever been in. I mean, it's very, very good.
Okay, that concludes the planning director's report. We'll be back in a minute to talk about sidewalk in Forest Glen. Okay, we're back to talk about sidewalk project in Forest Glen. I have to go. I've had a family health emergency arise, so I'll be out for a couple hours. I'm going to turn this over to the vice chair and see you all shortly. I'm sorry I'm missing this item, but with that, I'll hand it off. Thanks.
Great. And we have Stephen Aldrich to talk about the Forest Glen Road Sidewalk Project.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. For the record, Steve Aldrich from the Countywide Planning and Policy Division, and joining me today is a new face you might have seen many years ago, but Lily Mernon, who's a planning associate in Countywide Planning, and she helped me really help review some of the technical details of the project related to bicycle and pedestrian accommodation. And then joining us from the applicant side, we have Dan Sheridan, who is here with us today in the building, who is the chief of the design section, and Rebecca Park, who is joining us online, who is the project manager and a capital projects manager with MCDOT. So today we're going to give you just a quick introduction about the project. We're then going to turn over the presentation to Rebecca, who's going to take you through their presentation that they provide about the project. And they will then come back to myself and Lily, and we will take you through staff review and recommendations, and then lead to discussion. And then the intent of today is to get planning board comments relative to the two proposed options that have been developed by Montgomery County DOT.
Mr. Roach, this isn't a mandatory referral, but.
No, this is not. This is just a briefing.
And it will come back, though, as a
It
mandatory referral?
will come back.
Okay.
This project is at 30%, and so maybe 35%, some slight changes.
Great, thank you.
So the applicant is Montgomery County DOT. They currently do not have a consultant, which I think is just sort of reflective of that. This is a relatively small effort. It's being done right now in-house. It is being funded through a TAP grant, which is also something that is not the norm. And it is very much an interim improvement that they're looking at. It is total 2,700 feet from Woodland Drive to Sligo Creek Parkway. And this is, the intent is to provide a sidewalk on the north side of the street, really to connect not just the neighborhoods, but also to connect folks who work and travel to the Holy Cross Hospital and connect to the proposed Forest Glen passageway to get people to the Forest Glen metro station. So there's an awful lot of things going on in this and that are related to this. So we'll move ahead. So what I'll do right now is turn it over to Rebecca, who's going to take you through a brief presentation about the project, DOT's project. Rebecca. And I would suggest at this point,
Stephen.
maybe you should share your presentation on the screen.
Yes. Do that right now. Can everyone see the screen? See my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, good morning, everyone. Again, thank you for the introduction, Stephen. So here's the outline of the briefing. We'll start with the project limits and background, followed by project purpose, project overview. Then I'll walk you through the conceptual design for two options. Then we'll move on to impact quantities, project cost estimate, and project schedule. Here's the vicinity map for the project. The orange line represents the project site, which is along Forest Glen Road from Woodland Drive to Sligo Creek Parkway. When we presented this project to the public a year ago, we had project limit up to the Sligo Creek Trail, but based on their feedback, we extended the project limit out to Sligo Creek Parkway. Okay, so in November 2015, MCDOT received the request of the sidewalk construction along the north side of Forest Glen Road. Then we conducted assessment of the existing conditions. Based on the assessment, we recognized the need of safe pedestrian facility along the north side of the road. But because we didn't have any funding to start this project at the time, we applied for a TAP grant for developing preliminary design in May 2017. The project was awarded the TAP grant in July 2018. With the TAP grant money, we were able to start the design in October 2020. Like I said earlier, we had a virtual public meeting last year to receive feedback from the community. The purpose of the project is to address connectivity and safety needs on Forest Glen Road. It also provides connectivity to existing sidewalks, Sligo Creek Trail, Forest Glen Metro Station, Forest Glen Medical Center, Holy Cross Hospital, and Sligo Creek Stream Valley Park. The project also enhances safety for pedestrians and bicyclists in keeping with Montgomery County Vision Zero Action Plan. The project provides sidewalk and bike path improvements. The sidewalk is along the north side of Forest Glen Road from Woodland Drive to Sligo Creek Parkway, which is approximately half a mile. The new sidewalk will be 6 feet wide in concrete with a 0 to 6 feet wide grass buffer. The bike path improvement will be on the south side of the road. We will be removing the on-road bike facility, but we'll be widening the side path to 8 feet with addition of grass buffer. Now I'm gonna walk you through the option 1 of this concept design. So the upper portion of the slide represents the design from Woodland Drive to from Forest Grove Drive. The left-hand side of this typical section is the north side. The right side of this typical section is the south side of the road, and this is the side where Holy Cross Hospital is located. So sidewalk is 6 feet wide with 5 feet of grass buffer. We're narrowing the travel lane down to 10.5 feet, and we're widening the side path up to 8 feet with 5 feet minimum grass buffer. The lower portion of the typical section represents the design from Forest Grove Drive to Saxony Road. This typical section is pretty similar to what I just covered, except the buffer width varies from 0 to 5 feet. And here's the aerial plan view of the two typical sections. Here is Georgia Avenue in the left-hand side. The sidewalk is on the north side, as you can see here, and the side path is on the south side of the road. The green area is the new grass buffer we're putting in. And as you can see, we're restriping and reinstalling new crosswalks throughout the project site.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think as we're going through this, it might be helpful. Can you, and this number may vary, what is the width from edge to edge of the project in terms of the actual width of the sections that you're referring to?
From the
just the
edge
width
of this.
Yeah. I know it varies throughout the
Yes.
but do you have that number? If you don't, that's fine. I'm just trying to visualize.
I mean, it varies. I think it's as narrow as a. I don't know. I think it was, from my recollection, it was 36 feet. But it really varies.
It varies.
So
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have one other question or comment. The section that is north or that is west of Woodland Drive to Georgia Avenue, I understand on the north side, and I understand that's a subject for a redevelopment application. I don't have details of that at all, but I've just heard that it's being redeveloped. So is the reason that you're not extending from Woodland Drive to Georgia because of the expectation that it'll be handled by the developer? Because the underground tunnel that's going to go to Forest Glen Road is going to be at that corner of Georgia and Forest Glen, and it doesn't look like you're extending the sidewalk up to there, so it will cause a little bit of, it'll break it up a little bit, or it doesn't go all the way up to Georgia, which is what, I don't know why that's not included.
I had that same question both on the north side of that last block.
It's
Okay.
because
But the question is,
Um,
the sidewalk exists is what I've heard, but I think we'd probably want to make sure there's buffer and everything there. So I guess we could take care of that as part of the development project that comes in. Okay, thank you.
I will mention, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit, but the passageway, which is a pretty major structure to go underground, it may limit what is doable on that side of the property. It really depends on, what the master plan right-of-way is, what can fit. The key is to get an adequate sidewalk through to the intersection and to get the portal and get all that done. And it's possible that some of the buffer space might have to be a little constrained through there.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Park. I just wanted to have that
not a
clarification.
problem.
The other question would be, given these improvements, but making the improvements to Georgia Avenue and perhaps to the west of Georgia Avenue, does that negate the need for the crosswalk, the underground walkway? I mean, we debate that on 355 to
No,
the
definitely
metro
not.
station. Is that still viable and can be done, or is the funding there?
I think having redundant pedestrian facilities, yes, they're both needed.
Yeah.
Both needed, okay. So this would allow that to be completed. Good.
Okay. I'll continue.
Yes, please continue.
To the next typical section. So this typical section is for the area between Saxony Road and hospital entrance. The difference is that the buffer width here in this area will be consistently 6 feet. And then there will be a 10.5 feet turning lane on the south side. And here is the aerial plan of that typical section. Okay. The upper portion of the slide reflects design from hospital entrance to physician office entrance. Again, the buffer changes in this section. Now it varies from 0 to 3 feet. And the lower portion of the slide represents the typical section from physician's office entrance to Sligo Creek Trail. This will be open section. There will be no curb and gutter. 6 feet wide sidewalk will be right next to 5 feet of grass buffer, which is right next to travel lane. And here is the aerial view of the typical section. This portion here is the cross section at the Sligo Creek Bridge. Sidewalk will be 5 feet wide, but the buffer will vary from 2 to 7 feet. And there is currently a bike lane on the south side, which will remain. This cross section in the bottom of the slide is for the area from Sligo Creek Trail to Sligo Creek Parkway. The sidewalk width is back to 6 feet. And there will be curb and gutter constructed between the sidewalk and the existing bike lane on the north side. Again, the bike lane on the south side will remain. Here's the plan view of those two typical sections showing the eastern end of the project limits, which is the Sligo Creek Parkway. So that was it for option number 2. That was it for option number 1. Option number 2 was created based on WABA's request for adding a new bike lane in a westbound direction, which is uphill, and it's challenging for a cyclist to maneuver. So to create this new 5 feet wide bike lane on the north side, we reduced the width of sidewalk and a grass buffer. So instead of 6 feet of sidewalk in option 1, you see the 5 feet of sidewalk for option 2. Instead of 5 feet of grass buffer from option 1, you will have 4 feet of grass buffer. instead. But just like option number one, we're narrowing the travel lane width to 10.5 feet and widening the side path on the south side to 8 feet with 5 feet of minimum grass buffer. In the lower portion of the slide, we'll have everything the same except a grass buffer width, which varies from 0 to 4 feet. And on-street parking will remain at 8 feet on the south side. And here's the aerial plan view of those two typical sections. And you can see this new bike lane in the westbound of the Forest Glen Road. Next slide reflects the design from Saxony Road to Physician Office entrance. The buffer width goes back to 4 feet continuously in this section. And just like option number one, we'll have 10.5 feet turning lane. Here's the plan view. This is a cross section between Physician Office entrance and Sligo Creek Trail. There's no grass buffer in this section. Instead, there's curb and gutter separating the sidewalk from bike lane. And just like option number one, we're keeping the existing bike lane on the south side. Here's the aerial plan view of that typical section.
Can you go back to that
Here's a typical
slide for just one moment? I got a question on that.
this slide right here.
Yeah, on that one on the south side, you show where that one driveway is. There's a little piece of sidewalk there. Does that continue to existing sidewalk?
Which sidewalk?
Right
Are you
where
talking
your
about this
arrow is.
driveway?
Where your arrow is, yeah, the little piece to the. You have the light.
Yeah, the sidewalk stops here.
Well, you have the white part that to the left of your arrow.
Here's a white part.
Yeah.
Here's a white part. There's existing sidewalk, but the existing sidewalk ends at this existing crosswalk to Sligo Creek Trail. We are now widening the side path from this towards the east direction.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. And here's the aerial plan of the option number two at the eastern end of the project limit.
And again, my question would be at this point, if you're on the south side of the street, you don't cross the Sligo Parkway. You have to cross over to the north side to continue. In the northeast corner, there's a sidewalk there, but there's none on the south side, east of the Rock Creek Park.
Right, there's none. Right. There's none on the south side at this.
As a pedestrian, this is Steve, but as a pedestrian, yes, as a bicyclist, you can move into the bike lane.
You can continue, but a pedestrian, you need to cross to
Cross.
the north side and then cross the intersection there on the north. There's a sidewalk to the east there on the north, but none to the south on the street.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
there's a sidewalk on the north side of the
Right, thank you.
to the. So we assess the impacts for the two options. For utility impact, total number of 11 poles will be relocated under option one. 15 poles will be relocated under option two. In terms of tree impact, about 3 trees will be removed under option one. 11 trees will be removed under option two. We also assess the number of property impact. 17 properties will be impacted under option one, 23 under option two. In terms of construction costs, they're pretty much the same, with the option two slightly higher than the option one. We are also estimated the total project cost, and here are also the breakdowns for the two options. the option 2 is $100,000 more expensive than option 1, and when it comes to total project cost estimate, so they're pretty similar. Here's the project schedule. As I said earlier, we started the design back in October 2020 when we with the TAP grant funding. The red star represents now. After this briefing, the next step is for us to present this to TNE committee and finish up the preliminary design. Then we'll request the funding for the final design and construction to be available in FY25. So that's it, all I have.
So in a nutshell, I'm sorry, in a nutshell, what the difference between the two options is, it looks like option 2 has bike lane. It just takes some
Correct.
of the buffer. It has bike lane on both, because there's existing on the south side. So what it does is it provides a bike lane on the north side. Is that correct?
Yes, there's the existing bike lane on the south side doesn't start until here, like the east of the entrance to physician office. Here, the bike lane starts here. Again, there is a on-road bike facility between the travel lanes right now, but we are removing it. Instead, we're improving the path on the south side. And again, so the difference between the two options is option number 2 has the bike lane on the north side.
Are we going to get a presentation on options 3 and 4 from staff?
Yes, that's coming right up.
Got it. Just want to make sure.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I think we're ready for that.
All right. So now we're going to go through the staff review, which is presented in quite a lot of detail in the staff report on the briefing. The road today has 2 travel lanes, 1 in each direction. The shoulders in the westbound direction are pretty variable. In some places there's no shoulder, in other places it's pretty narrow. It generally is enough in some places for bikes to actually use it, but not that safely. In the eastbound direction, however, it's a combination of wide shoulders with parking. So bikes in the eastbound direction can use, they have a pretty good trip in the eastbound direction, which is the downhill direction. And adjacent to the right turn lanes that go into the hospital, there's actually a separate bike lane that helps them navigate past all the right turning vehicles. And as I mentioned, westbound is the uphill direction. It's the tougher direction for bikes to travel on this road because of the grades and the speed differentials between bikes and cars.
Have you observed people I think I may have seen, trying to imagine people going up the hill, but does staff know if people are actually doing it? Because it is quite a bit of a steep hill.
Yes.
I don't know if you guys have observed it during your study of the area.
I have seen bikes going westbound on that, and the ones I saw were on the street, and they go pretty slowly.
Very slowly.
Due to the grade, especially getting up towards Georgia.
Okay.
So as we looked at the options, this project was a little difficult to review for us because, one, we understand that it's a really incremental and interim project to add a sidewalk on the north side, which is great. However, we're required to really look at the master plan vision and try to make sure that whatever is going to be proposed will fit within that vision. And that's where I think we had a little difficulty in reviewing the 2 options. The 2 options just didn't seem to get us to the point where we could actually make some really good decisions. Option 1, the sidewalk with primarily minimum buffers. There are places where the buffers are less than 6 feet, which is our default. Some of the locations I think are understandable, places where there are steep grades and where you would have to have some pretty big retaining walls to make it work. But I think in general, if option 1 had been 6 feet except in a few places, we would like option one a lot better. There are other places where it compromises just due to lack of space. Yeah. Option two, which added the sidewalk, really did it at the expense of the buffers. In both of these two options, they eliminated the eastbound bike lane, going downhill, which, initially I think we were, we see the benefits of that eastbound downhill bike lane. But, as we looked at the WABA proposal, the westbound bike lane actually is, I think more beneficial because of the speed differentials. Ideally, it would be nice if they could do both of them. But we're really trying to look at what was proposed and what does the master plan require. So this is, this was option one. And I'm showing just some typical cross sections. This is right near the hospital entrance where there is the eastbound right turn lane. And as I mentioned, the difference between existing and this one of the major differences is, the lack of shoulders in either direction, the elimination of the eastbound bike lane. This is I think one of the few sections in option one that has a 6-foot buffer. Most of the other places, they're close, they're 5, they might be 4. Generally it conforms for the most part, but minimum is minimum. So we definitely would like to see 6 everywhere unless there's, really significant environmental or cost impacts. Option two, as Rebecca presented, again, this is the same section pretty much in front of the hospital. I think here the critical thing is that, as we look at it, our county sidewalk defaults changed over the past 5, 6, 7 years. 5 feet used to be our standard. 6 feet is now our minimum standard. So option two, not only did it reduce the buffer a little bit, it shaved a foot off the sidewalk. And, if we're going to have a Forest Glen passageway where we want to get people to one of our metro stations, I think it's important that we have, at a minimum, an adequate pedestrian facility that meets our minimum standards. So as part of this, we looked at master plans and our Complete Streets Design Guide to give us some guidelines of what should occur on this road. Forest Glen Road today is master planned as a 2-lane minor arterial. With the adoption of the Complete Streets Guideline county code changes that we are anticipating through county council review soon, a minor arterial will be translated into an area connector in the Complete Streets Design Guide. And I will talk about area connector in a second because when we presented this to you folks back in 2021, we didn't have that street type. It's really a variant of the neighborhood connector, and it represents, I guess, some concessions with Montgomery County DOT and the council that the current minor arterial really needs its own street type. So we've separated neighborhood connectors into neighborhood connectors and area connectors. And they have some different standards, not so much in what goes on the road, but what, in some cases, the target speeds and some of the less geometric elements. So as part of the Complete Streets Design Guideline for an area connector, the existing 8-foot wide side path on the south side of the corridor is 2 feet short of the default side path width for an area connector, which is 10 feet. And when you think about this corridor, if we're taking away some current shoulder usage, in a lot of cases we're sort of forcing bikes onto a side path that is a minimum width in the vicinity of a hospital, where you may have people with mobility issues trying to walk to get to doctor's appointments, et cetera. So having the default, the 10-foot width, I think is really important for this corridor. And again, realizing that the applicant's submission is for a sidewalk on the north side. It's hard to separate the two when we look at the whole master plan vision. The 2018 bicycle master plan recommended a side path on the south side of Forest Glen between Georgia Avenue and Brunette. And one of the parts of the bicycle master plan that I was not quite as aware of is that for minor arterials, which is the same as area connectors, once we do the translation, there's some language that says where space is available and does not substantially detract from the default bikeway, bike lanes or bikeable shoulders can be added in addition to the default bikeway. And I think this is really important for this road because this road is a major connection between a major recreational commuter trail, the Sligo Creek Parkway and Sligo Creek Trail, and the Forest Glen Metro Station. This is a major place where bikers really need to make this connection, and you are going to have a significant mixture between folks bikers who actually want to ride on a side path versus bikers who want to ride in the street. And I think this language in the bicycle master plan was intended to sort of catch this purpose. This type of street is intended to primarily have bike facilities separated, except when it's a minor arterial and there's a desire to have on-road facilities as well, which I think it definitely captures the needs of this corridor. This is the area connector street type from the Complete Streets Design Guideline, and it will be added to the Complete Streets Design Guide document after the county council makes their recommendations and approval. And at that point, we would actually bring that document back to your, back here to get some revisions approved. And hopefully that will be either later this fall or early in 2023. And I think what I really want to point out here is that, Complete Streets presented some sort of unique ways of how we design within our street rights-of-way. And the most important part, I think, in Complete Streets is that we have priorities, and the priorities vary by street types. So when you look at the priorities for an area connector, the high priorities are the street buffer and the sidewalks and side paths. Those facilities are the highest priorities. They should be designed not to minimum standards. They should be designed to default or wider, depending on the situation. On-street bikeways get a medium priority. Parking gets a low priority on this type of street, which makes a lot of sense. So if there's something they have to cut, parking probably should be the thing that gets cut. So as we reviewed DOT's options, we feel overall that option one provides a better overall sidewalk experience because the sidewalk width is closer to our default or minimum widths. The buffers are closer to our minimum widths. And option two, sort of compromises the sidewalk experience to add a westbound bike lane. It's not a bad idea. I maybe question the timing and what's being compromised to achieve it. So as we went through this, and we identified some priorities that we feel should be used for design, and some of these priorities I think we apply a lot when we look at road improvements relative to the bike plan and the master plan of highways and transitways. For this project, the number one priority really is providing the high quality sidewalk on the north side. That's the intent of this limited action. But within the corridor, the second priority is to also provide this high-quality side path on the south side. And while the project is going to widen some portions of the current sidewalk on the south side into a side path to 8 feet, it's our minimum standard. It's not our default standard. We would be much happier if that the entire side path was proposed to be widened to 10. That would make a much better project. The third priority is to ensure that all dimensions and priorities align with the Complete Streets Design Guide. And I've mentioned minimum and default standards. It's really important that unless there's really some significant an environmental or, the reality is cost impacts, that we should be meeting those standards as much as possible. The fourth priority is that we need to reduce posted speeds on the roads where we do design work to match existing target speeds. We do have a target speed on this road, which is 25. The posted speed is higher than that. And while this project is eliminating many of the shoulders, which will help make a more narrow section, it doesn't propose to reduce the speed limit. This is often a recommendation that we make. At DOT, that determination usually happens after the design is complete. So it's really just sort of, hey, remember to have your folks look at reducing the posted speed. And the last priority, while we think the uphill bike lane in the westbound direction, it's a great idea. For us, it's our last thing. And we have to get the master plan recommendations implemented first. And then if there are other great ideas that also fit within the recommendations of the bike plan, great. So as part of our review, we came up with two additional options, options 3 and option 4. Option 3, we call the master plan vision, and option 4 is the master plan vision plus the uphill bike lane. And both of these, both option 3 and 4 are fully consistent with the bicycle master plan and the Complete Streets Design Guide. So here is a cross-section view of option 3, which provides some very consistent geometrics for the whole corridor, a 6-foot sidewalk on the north side consistently, except in a few places, a 10-foot wide side path on the south side consistently, including connecting to the Sligo Creek Parkway, 6-foot minimum buffers on both sides, and no on-street parking. Option 4 pretty much is the same thing, except it adds a 5-foot westbound bike lane. And so our contention really is that you need to conceptualize where all of these things need to go. Because when you build the sidewalk, you're only going to build the sidewalk once. So you need to put it in the right place, and you need adequate buffers. You don't want to move curbs. Curbs are very expensive. So everything really needs to be planned to set things up, even for a short-term project.
And this is my question that I proposed earlier because I was calculating the width of like all these different sections, and somehow or another you managed to squeeze in the right amount of spacing for each of our priorities. So with this, I'm assuming this becomes a larger project given it's almost 65 feet wide. Is that the assumption here?
Yes, it would become a larger project or a longer-term project. But I think as part of this project, what we would recommend is that DOT continue with the project that they want to do, but that they also draw up at least option 3 and make sure that their option fits in the same place. Because the worst thing is to put improvements down, and especially if you're putting in curb, then have to move it a foot.
Yeah.
It'll cost you an awful lot of money. So if you do a little bit more planning and you essentially design, even at a concept level, what the ultimate will look like, that will save you money in the long term and put the improvements in the right place.
I'll wait till you finish.
Okay, so now Lily Mernon is going to take us through a very detailed evaluation that she did looking at all 4 options, and this actually helped us, I think, to determine how the priorities that we presented earlier. When we started looking at all the trade-offs, and then identified the need to create our own options. Lily.
Thank you. Good morning, Lily Mernon for the record, working with Countywide Planning and Policy. This slide summarizes our evaluation of all 4 options, which you can see in the columns, against the standards in the Complete Streets Design Guide for sidewalk, side path, buffers, and bike lanes, shown in the rows of this table. As Steve mentioned earlier, the design guide provides default standards, which are the facilities that planning staff ask for on each type of roadway, and it really improves pedestrian and bicyclist comfort and safety. So any element that meets that default standard is shown here in blue with a plus sign in this table. The guide also provides those minimum standards, which the applicant's required to provide justification for providing only that minimum. And here it's shown in yellow with X's, and then if if any of the elements do not meet any of the standards, they're shown in orange with the negative sign. So as Steve stated earlier, the option 3 and 4 do meet all the Complete Streets Design Guide standards. And then compared with option 1 and 2, these have wider sidewalks, street buffers, and they widen the side path on the south side of the road to that 10 feet default. In contrast, option 1 and 2 generally don't meet the default standards. There are some, as Steve mentioned, there are some areas where there are 6 feet buffers, but overall there are many areas where that minimum is not met. And the sidewalk that MCDOT is proposing in option 1 is 6 feet, but in option 2 it is not, so it doesn't meet the standard. And then the side path is currently 8 feet, and MCDOT is proposing to keep that at 8 feet. So there's no change, and that meets the minimum standard. In concerning bike lanes, you see where the rows are NA and some yellow X's. All of the options remove the eastbound on-street bike lane, except for some edge of option 1 and 2. And this worsens overall biking conditions on the south side of the road, but by widening the side path to 10 feet in options 3 and 4, that provides a better facility for biking in that case. And then to address Wabba's comments, option 2 and 4 do provide the on-street bike lane, which you can see with yellow X's in this table. Next slide. So providing all of the Complete Streets Design Guide elements really corresponds to better pedestrian level of comfort scores and bicycle level of traffic stress scores, which are used by planning staff to assess the comfort and the safety of walking and biking on the roadway. So this slide evaluates each option for pedestrian level of comfort, and the colors here have similar meanings. So orange is the PLOC grade 4, which is the worst grade. 1, which shown here in green, is the best score. And we have 2 tables to just show you how reducing the speed limit from 35 miles an hour to 25 really does have a significant effect on pedestrian safety and comfort when walking on this roadway. And you can see that option 3 and 4 have more consistently improved conditions compared to option 1 and 2. So by meeting those design guide standards. Next slide. And there's a similar story for biking. In this case, we again have the 2 tables to show the impact of reducing speed on the roadway, which is pretty significant, especially for on-street biking. Even where there isn't a bike lane, it improves biking conditions. And we have 3 sections of the road where people could ride. So you see the first 2 are on-street biking, and then the third one is the side path. So that's why we have 3 different grades. And then you can see the impact also of improving the side path to 10 feet, where it's the best grade for biking along the entire corridor compared to options 1 and 2. Next slide. So to just bring this back to the staff priorities that Steve outlined in the beginning, that top priority of providing the north side sidewalk is met in option 1, 3, and 4, but not in 2. For the side path on the south side of the road, which really is the master planned bike facility for this roadway, only options 3 and 4 meet that default standard and provide that adequate facility. And that should come before any installation of an on-street bike lane, because that is the master planned bike facility. And then priority 3, meeting all the other Complete Streets design standards, option 3 and 4 address that priority. And then for priority 4, none of the options address reducing the speed limit, but that would, as I showed in the last slides, that would really improve pedestrian safety and comfort. And then for priority 5, that uphill bike lane, options 2 and 4 provide that, and in our staff report, we omitted including option 2, so that's been changed here in red. Thank you. Hand it back to Steve.
All right, great, thank you. So we'll move to recommendations, and then we're certainly happy to have discussions, and we can bring our our colleagues from Montgomery County D into the conversation. So planning staff recommends the planning board endorse option 4 as the design concept that best matches the master plan requirements and the standards in the Complete Streets Design Guideline and addresses valid concerns from the biking community. If the spatial requirements of an uphill bicycle lane create excessive property impacts or costs, staff recommends option 3, which we still think is an acceptable solution. And as I mentioned previously, it's that is the base master plan vision. If this option entails prohibited costs, planning staff recommends pursuing option 1. So from I guess that last little piece is really recognizing that this is a limited project from the applicant's perspective. We're not necessarily saying you need to build it now. We're saying that you need to plan for the entire cross section when you continue with your project. The third recommendation is if MCDOT adjusts only the sidewalk without making other improvements, they will need to ensure there's adequate wide right-of-way. That's pretty much what I said without reading that slide. And we definitely feel that even simple interim improvements can make implementing the master plan vision more challenging if not planned correctly, or carefully. And then finally, independent of the option selected, planning staff recommends that MCDOT consider reducing the posted speed limit on this section of Forest Glen Road, 1 to match the target speed, in both the master plan highways and the Forest Glen Montgomery Hill sector plan, which is 25 miles per hour. And those are our recommendations. Turn it back to you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you for that. I think it's a good time to bring Mr. Sheridan to the table. Be curious to hear what you have to say with regards to staff's presentation, particularly with them not only endorsing option 4 and then 3 and 1 in terms of priorities, but also understanding the scope of the project, the funding, how you perceive these options, and just general comments that have been listed here.
Yes, thank you. This is Dan Sheridan, for the record, MCDOT, Division of Transportation Engineering. Thank you for staff's detailed dive into our design, and we worked with them throughout the process to get to this point. Multiple meetings, and so we appreciate the aspirational part of it, and we were just coming from where the project started from. Again, it was a sidewalk request. We didn't have the funds for it. We went for a grant, rejected the first time, got it the second time. The reason we're using in-house staff is one of the conditions of the grant is that we couldn't use one of our design consultants because that wasn't done under federal procurement rules. So we had the ability to do it with Rebecca as a project manager and Angel Chang as a designer. So again, we were going towards that, and then all along trying to, wherever possible, meet the conditions or the guidelines, the Complete Street Design Guidelines, which are newer than the start of this project or the inception of this project. So we appreciate the input, and would love to hear what the planning board thinks would be the best option. I do think going to option 3 or 4, we had to take a look at it and come up with a comparable cost estimate.
Thank you for that. Anyone on the board have some comments? We can start off with
Go
CT.
Go ahead, if you can. I'll follow
Okay.
you.
So my comment has to do with always looking to the future. And because the Forest Glen area is going to, right now, as I said earlier, there's an application in for a significant addition of residential units at Georgia and Forest Glen on the where the medical center is. But I also know that there's a proposal for a significant number of additional units, residential units at the Forest Glen Metro. So I think that in the future, and not too distant future, that section of Forest Glen Road between Georgia Avenue and Sligo Creek Parkway, is going to be pretty busy both for pedestrians and for cyclists, because I believe that it will, encourage, if there are bicycle facilities, it will encourage those that live in the new units. And there's also another project, redevelopment of an existing housing project that's going to add more units. I believe that, plus the addition of the underground tunnel into Forest Glen Metro is creating a real pedestrian area. And for that reason, I would go along with staff's recommendation for option 4, because I think it's really going to be helpful. Potentially, even maybe the hospital could get rid of, or at least reduce, its shuttle use between the hospital and Forest Glen Metro that they have running all day, which again would reduce the carbon footprint. It would take, more vehicles off the road, perhaps. And I think it's only going to happen if there's an encouragement of walking and bicycling between the Forest Glen area and going all the way down to Sligo Creek Parkway. I'm really, I think that we have to be forward-thinking, knowing what the development is going to be in that area and being able to address, accommodate that with encouragement of pedestrian and bicycle use. So I'm going to favor, and I know you're going to have to sharpen your pencils, look at the cost and other things, but clearly we have to look into the future of how the development's going to occur. So that's kind of where I am.
One thing I'd just sort of like to say as a corollary to that is, if this was a new, one of the things that we actually asked DOT to look at very carefully was the continued need for the exclusive right turn lanes into the hospital, because it's provided at 3 different locations, at Dameron and the 2 hospital driveways. And they looked at essentially the turn lane warrants and the need at those locations, determined that they were justified. But I think if this was a new hospital, we might come to a different conclusion, because our standards of today are now different. So the idea that it's a very car-centric focus entrance, into this hospital, and this is a hospital that now is one of the few in the DC area that actually has metro access. You would expect this to be much more of a non-vehicular hospital in the future. And so, that was one thing that staff did ask DOT to look at carefully, because we were looking for, here's room that we possibly could use for bicycle or buffer or pedestrian purposes. But, according to their standards, they need those right turn lanes today.
Yeah, obviously you're talking about visitors and employees, not patients.
I had that same question. I'm using a cane at the moment, but my question to MCDOT, in terms of where was the grant from? That was a federal grant or a state grant?
It's a state grant.
It's the federal grant.
Well, it's administered through the state Transportation Alternatives.
Okay, and
program.
in terms of the recommendations of our staff, does that jeopardize the grant in any way, or would you have to reapply if it modifies?
No, the grant is for a sidewalk, so I think the only thing that's in jeopardy really is from the start of the grant, within 10 years, it's supposed to be in the ground.
So would you have MCDOT have supplemental funds to do some of the recommendations from our staff?
Well, if you're going to recommend an option 3 or option 4 for us to look at, we'd have to go back, study that, and then decide. We don't have any money for anything right now other than preliminary design.
And hopefully that wouldn't jeopardize the grant then. You got this 10-year, this can get
Right,
done.
no, so we would do the additional, if you ask us to do an additional option,
Yeah.
we can look at that, come up with a cost, and,
Try to move ahead.
yeah.
Right, okay, thank you.
I will mention that, with the passageway project going on essentially at the same time, there really is a focus on trying to provide the pedestrian connectivity on the north side. We think a lot of people will come out of the metro, cross in the portal, and then stay on the north side of the street. And then if we ultimately approve the side path on the south side, we'll end up having more bicycles on the south side of the street. So we think it will help to, in some ways, sort of segregate the 2 modes, not not by total separate facilities, just by the way that the circulation patterns work. And, we think those two improvements will work really well together. And all of our recommendations, we don't want to jeopardize that. We want the sidewalk on the north side, however it can be done.
One other question. I guess that our staff had presented, it's kind of the Virginia option where they flipped the roadways and that interchange, the whole interchange with the Beltway was something that our staff proposed. The state was looking at improvements to Georgia Avenue. Do any of those relate to this intersection and how you make the connections?
Are you referring to the, during the Forest Glen, Montgomery Hill Sector Plan?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, we had floated the idea of a diverging diamond interchange
Right.
on Georgia. And I believe that they're still looking at it, but I don't know where that
Does
stands.
any of that affect this kind of the intersection of Forest Glen and that project?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Patterson, did you have any comments?
I did, thank you. I want to thank both the MCDOT staff as well as our staff for the presentation. Thinking about the recommendations, I think it's important for us to reemphasize, and Mr. Sheridan, Ms. Park, I like your comments about this. In the list of recommendations, I thought the one that is probably the easiest to implement, and this is where I would like your thoughts, is regarding reducing the speed limit. And what does that cost, if there's any cost, and what would be the time frame to implement that? Not taking away from the analysis that you've done, but I think this is something that's an easier start from my perspective, but I want to ask you as a subject matter expert, what's the reality?
Sure. So this implementation of the speed limit signs is by a different division than us, but we work with them, and we're going in this direction. So I would say to implement it, as Steve alluded to it earlier, is like it would be something that we would do in our final signing and marking plan. We would collaborate with them, and I think they would, can't speak for them, but I think they would most certainly agree with the lower speed limit, and it would just be a part of the project. It's already included in the cost. Like we have, signing and marking as part of anything that we're going to be doing, any upgrade we're going to be doing, and that would just be,
And I think
almost a slam dunk.
Yeah, I think what's important about, DOT has a responsibility to set the speed limits that are realistic and attainable. And the target speed is the goal, the posted speed limit is what they feel is realistic. All of the options that have been presented today, I think, will get us to the target speed. Today, it's probably difficult to get to the target speed because of the wide shoulders on the south side.
That's a good,
And the wider
a
travel
good point.
lanes.
The narrow lanes, is basically the one thing that we're doing to control speed, and that all of the options will have a narrower lanes than are existing today.
I'd like to hear from Ms. Park as well, and not to take away from the gentleman at the table, but Ms. Park, I know you spent quite a bit of time talking about options 1 and 2, and the speed limit was not part of your presentation. Any thoughts regarding that recommendation?
Again, that's not our expertise. We circle back to the traffic division for the traffic engineers to assess the request. So we have to circle back to the team.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with it, Dean Sheridan.
Okay, so for staff, looking at the recommendations, and I usually ask this question when I see the list, is that your wish list and prioritized? Okay, would you consider moving that independent of the options to reducing the speed limit a little higher, or you think it's best for us to keep it where it is at the bottom of your recommendations?
I think DOT could look at reducing the speed limit today, but I'm not sure that they would make the determination that you folks want without some type of physical improvements out there. I'm not sure. We'd have to look at the speed data, and they would have to make an engineering determination of whether they think they could get up compliance. One of the manual uniform traffic control devices, which is, pretty much what a lot of the rules are set, respect for the signs, it's pretty important. And if you put up signs that people just say, I can't drive that speed, then people are not going to respect it. And so the key is to, if they can find that they feel that they can get compliance to 25, yes, they could look at it tomorrow and make that determination. So there would be no harm except maybe for manpower and, doing an assessment now. But we definitely feel once any of these improvements are in place, that they should lower the speed limit as well.
If I could, Commissioner Patterson, for the record, Jason Sartori with Countywide Planning, to really directly answer your question, I think we could absolutely put that at the top of the list. Yeah, we really saw that as a recommendation, regardless of what option moves forward, that it stood alone by itself, and so we could have that as, comment number one, followed by here are our prioritized list of the different options that are available.
Thank you, Mr. Sartori. Mr. Sheridan, Ms. Park, I look forward to hearing what you have to say when you come back after you've done your additional analysis.
Can I about how, do you know approximately the time frame? How long it would take you to do the analysis of option 4 and option 3 actually is part of that?
Well, I would ask that you'd pick one, and then I'm going to let Rebecca say that. How long do you think it would do to? How long do you need?
I would say about, because it requires a lot of coordinations, and we also looked into getting rid of the parking lane, which was going to be a project itself. I would say it would take about 4 to 5 months, to be on conservative side, 4 to 5 months of looking into implementing options 3 and 4. If I may say about the parking, we looked into, we explored the option of removing the parking lane because there is a low turnover rate, but we also found out that this is now up for the county to DOT to modify. This is the what's it called, residential permit parking that requires the petition process where the residents with the parking permits will vote in favor of modification. So it becomes a project itself. We have to do public outreach if we go with that direction of removing the parking lane. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Jerry, I have an additional question. What is the posted speed there now? Do you know? 35.
I believe that's a 35, yeah.
30.
35.
35. 30. So you're going to go 5 miles per hour. And then in terms of that particular proposal, who provides the speed ticket machines to give tickets out? Is that you guys still?
No, we don't have. I think that's the police department that does the.
They're putting it in.
I mean, there's not.
So,
one
I mean, again, if you're going to do that, you need to coordinate with them and have that put in there so that if you're really serious about 25, you need to ticket it if it's people going over. Now, whether, again, in a hospital environment like this, people are a little more cautious, that might be one consideration. But if you're going to really go to 25, there's out on, when you go out 28, there's one sign says 30 miles per hour, but a few hundred feet in front of it, it says 40. And I personally recommended, take down the 40, if you want people, this is going, but you're encouraging people. So again, looking at what the pre-signs are about the speed, you come to this area, you need to know if you go to 25, post it and then ticket it if people are violating it. And again, I agree with the comment that people that have injuries, walking with canes, might not be necessarily walking. They might be taking a cab or someone dropping them off at the hospital or,
I wanted to respond to Commissioner Patterson's comment. These are our recommendations on the screen right now. And I guess what I would propose based on the discussion that we just had would be to take the 4th bullet, move it up to the 1st bullet, and to add some discussion about the staff priorities changing with the speed reduction being priority number 1.
Yeah, I think that works. And I agree with planning staff's recommendations. I do want to just state that I do think it's important to, and I'm glad that you put in the caveats that if there are going to be prohibitive costs or significant property impacts, that we look at option 3, and also given your own priority list, option 3 seems to be on the higher side when you talk about pedestrian connections. So I think that's an important comment to make. But to Commissioner Rubin's point, because there is development coming here, I don't want us to get in the way of getting this done in a timely manner, because I do think with the development coming and the connections, there's potentially going to be retail also at that site that people may want to access from the adjoining communities. So to the extent that you can study 3 and 4, I think you should take a look at it. But at the same time, I do think it's important to get this done. I mean, this is the product of activism that goes back to 2017. We're in 2022. We're looking at construction probably, in the next couple of years, hopefully, at least getting started. Or maybe that's ambitious.
Well, it's not in any budget right now.
It's not
so
in the
it would
budget
be,
right
It would
now.
be a proposal to get it into the next budget,
Sure.
which would be the 25 to 31 budget.
Sure,
And that
yeah.
would be, final design and then, land acquisition and construction. So you're looking at a multi-year process, and you're getting up towards, hey, we got to get something in the ground, or we're going to have to give the money back for the grant.
Yes. So I just want that to be part. I mean, people sometimes forget where this started and where it's going. So the community has been asking this for some time now. So I think we should be operating in that space. I did have a question since, I was a big supporter of this, and I drive this stretch every day, literally. And I've seen excessive speeding. We've also had a pedestrian collision right at the trail. I drive very slow on purpose, and I often get honked at. And I've had people even pass me on Forest Glen Road, which is absolutely ridiculous. But you brought up a good point about Mr. Aldridge about compliance and having realistic speed limits. But between the hospital, the signal there, the Georgia Avenue, the trail that has a signal that gets operated once it detects pedestrian activity, and then the signal at Sligo itself, you have like 4 sections right there. Is this an opportunity to do something like 20 is plenty as a pilot, or is that too low? I mean, we have 25 miles per hour here in the Wheaton urban area on Georgia, but because there's so many sections here, I often wonder, why are people just rushing to something that they're only going to stop to? And I know that's part of the driving experience everywhere, pretty much. You always see people who are speeding, and then at the red light they've all caught up with you, and you're like, okay, that didn't really get you anywhere. So just a question for MCDOT. I know you are doing that, and I know this is out of your wheelhouse, but do you think that that's something that you could potentially explore and see if that's a possibility?
So a couple things. A traffic signal is not to control speed, it's to control right-of-way, who has the right-of-way. So it's not a speed control device. So that's one thing. Second is back to what Steve alluded to on what is the driver's expectation and that. So just the road sort of dictates the speed that can be attained, and then you may drive slow, but then that can create unintended consequences of people passing you and things like that, where they shouldn't be. So the road has to speak to the speed limit, and that's where, by narrowing the lanes and things like that,
Would facilitate that.
a successful lowering of the speed can happen, if that makes sense.
And this road certainly could be a candidate for a speed camera because of the hospital concerns that people should be traveling more carefully.
And the trail intersection.
And the trail, yes, definitely.
Well, I think that's something we should also put in our comments, if that's a possibility.
I believe MCDOT does not control speed cameras. That's the police. Yeah, so that's not something we can do.
Well, as we go to electrical cars, we obviously, with the technology, we can actually have something control the speed of the electric cars. Now, we're getting rid of gas cars, so the future brings speed and traffic and the way you
The
all
autonomous
argue that it
vehicles.
should be. So let's look into the future.
I do want to mention that in the Complete Streets Design Guide, code changes that are being presented to the council actually next Monday at T&E, a change that was agreed to by both DOT and planning staff, and I believe by council as well, I'm sorry, by planning board as well, was neighborhood connectors. The target speed currently in the guide is 25, and we're proposing to change that to 20. This road is an area connector, which is
Sure.
one slight step up, but, I think with any sort of default parameter, like a target speed, there can be exceptions, and this may be a place where an exception is deserved.
Sure. Any other comments from anyone? I think so. I think we have a pretty good direction of looking at 3 and 4 with the idea of understanding that 3 could, if there's excessive property impacts, 3 would probably be better. But thank you so much. We'd like to get this done, so I think that's the spirit of this project and the constraints that you have in terms of timeline. So thank you for bringing it to us today. And with that, we're going to be going to item 7. Okay, we have item 7, the conditional use for 15700 Darnestown Road with Mark Beal and friends.
Good morning. For the record, Mark Beal, zoning planner, Up County Planning Area. It's my privilege today to bring you the Windridge Vineyard Country Inn conditional use. Conditional use number is CU202210. For a little bit of background on the project, Windridge has been up and running for, I believe, a couple of years now. They are approved under previous use of farm alcohol production for the zoning ordinance. They have a state license that allows them to stay open until 6 p.m. in the evenings, and with the conditional use, they can obtain a second license from the state of Maryland that will allow them to stay open later in the day. As you can see on the picture, the site is outlined in goldenrod or orange or yellow, excuse me. It is 15,700 Darnestown Road. It's on the west side of Darnestown Road. As you can see from the picture, we have a couple existing vineyards. We have an existing parking lot and an existing building. The first floor contains a tasting room, and the lower level contains a production area and a wine cellar. And access to the site is directly across from Bellingham Drive off of Darnestown Road. Outlined in red, we have the neighborhood. The entire area that's in red is RC, or Rural Clustered Zone. To the northeast, going down through the south area, we have all low-density residential dwellings. To the north, we have a property that has an active farm. And to the west, we have Seneca State Park. Let's see here. We have a little blow up here of the site, shows the existing building and the existing parking areas. Here's some nice pictures of the area. You can see Sugarloaf Mountain in the distance on the northwest side, looking directly west. You can see overlooks the state park, and the sign is at the entrance along Darnestown Road. So with the conditional use approval, they would be able to apply for a second license through the state of Maryland to increase their hours so that their customers can enjoy the beautiful summer sunsets, as well as they can offer different types of foods and be able to have good food, upscale food and wine pairings. This is, you can see the red star, it's where it's located. It's in the Potomac Subregion Master Plan. There's no specific recommendations for this project, and the use is compatible with the master plan. The conditional use will not cause any adverse impact on the surrounding neighborhoods. The application is consistent with the requirements of the conditional use for Country Inn, as well as the general conditions and requirements of the conditional use. Staff has not received any correspondence for this property, and we recommend approval with condition to be transmitted to the hearing examiner. Thank you for your time. We have staff here, supervisors, and the applicant, if you guys have any questions. Thank you.
One, for the record, on one of our field trips to the Ag Reserve, we did stop and have a visit to the site, and it is something that is very accessible. Yeah.
Anything from the applicant?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and members of the board. I won't take long. You're behind schedule, I know, but I did want to really just introduce Robert Butts to you. Robert and his family, it's a true testament to the success of agriculture in Montgomery County. I wanted him to say a word or two.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'll be brief as well. And thank you very much for considering my application. And also wanted to say thanks to staff as well. I felt like throughout this whole process, regardless of what you guys do, that I've been treated very fairly and professionally. So I appreciate that. As Bob was saying, I'm a lifelong farmer in Montgomery County. It's the only job I've ever held. My brother lives in the house that we grew up in, which is right next door to the winery. So I guess perhaps you can say that we sort of lacked imagination. But the winery and vineyard has been an important enhancement or diversification to Windridge Farms. Windridge Farms still exists. It's still a very healthy company. We still engage in our legacy row crop businesses, but they're getting tougher and tougher to do as the years go on, and access to large contiguous tracts of land gets tougher and tougher to find. Windridge Vineyards is a business that could be done on a correspondingly very small number of acres, and I feel it's an agricultural business that will survive for myself and my children and on down. And that's really the reason that I started trying to pursue Country Inn, was to think about the future of this business and trying to solidify it. Most of the things that I'm asking for in the Country Inn are things that farm breweries and farm distilleries in Montgomery County already have. And it's just because of a quirk in that the Maryland farm winery law was passed about a decade ahead of the farm brewery and distilleries law. And they learned from the mistakes in the farm winery law, and the new law's better, but they never went back and fixed the farm winery law. And so having consistent hours and being able to offer more food options is really important to me. If you guys go on Yelp, I just got a 1-star review on Yelp because for one reason, that the food trucks ran out of food. And I can't control the food trucks. Now, they did go to completely torch down my wine, which was disappointing. But in reality, that 1-star review just highlighted to me really why I'm here. We aspire to offer excellent wine and excellent customer service. And to do that, I need to bring a little bit more control over my site. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
As an aside,
Sure.
Mr. Butts' father was on the Agricultural Advisory Board when they set up the Ag Reserve many years ago. So, and they farmed 1,200 acres locally here, so an important part. So thank you for listening to us.
Thank you so much for that background. It's very helpful, and I also agree with staff's recommendation. Unless the board has any comments, I look for a motion.
I move approval of conditional use CU 202210 with recommendations as presented by staff.
Is there a second?
I second heartily because I think it's great. It's a great opportunity to expand the financial benefits and serve the community, and I think it's fabulous.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The recommendation's approved. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Next, we have rustic roads, item 8. Okay, we are ready for the Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan update with Jamie Pratt and friends.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Roberto Duke with the Up County Division. I'm here with Jamie Pratt, my co-lead on the plan, and also Casey Roan from Historic Preservation. And we are going to quickly go through the information regarding the working draft and appendix, and as that's been received as part of your packet. At the end, At the end of the presentation, we are requesting that the planning board releases the working draft as the public hearing draft and sets a date for the public hearing.
So just had a question, because I know there's a lot of material here. Do you prefer that we provide feedback at the very end, or maybe it's better to break it down in segments? Is there any preference on your part?
No preference.
None whatsoever, whichever you prefer.
Maybe in line.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. That way it's better context. And
Sure.
Does that work?
Yeah, if you could just let us know, when it's good for you for a break. I have a significant number of comments, so I just want to make sure that I don't want to break up the flow of your presentation, and I want to make it easier for you to follow up and take notes and do what you need.
So you can tell us when is a good stopping point. So
Yeah, I think because we have a slide that introduces each chapter, we'll just stop there and talk about previous items.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, please.
And we will briefly go over the chapters of the Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan Working Draft. And so we're starting with the introduction. In 1980, the County Council approved the Functional Master Plan for the Preservation of Agriculture and Rural Open Space, the AROS Plan. And the Agricultural Reserve was created with its densities of 1 house per 25 acres. The AROS Plan established land conservation policies to protect farmland and agricultural areas, encompassing approximately 93,000 acres along the county's northern, western, and eastern borders. But it did not provide long-term protection for the roads within the agricultural reserve and the adjacent rural areas. In 1990, a task force was created to investigate long-term protection of the county's rural roads, leading to the creation of the Rustic Roads Program in 1993 and the 1996 Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan. With the vision, rustic roads and exceptional rustic roads are historic and scenic roadways that reflect the agricultural character of rural origin of the county. In addition to being an integral part of the agricultural transportation network, rustic roads provide the county with opportunities for heritage tours and economic development. Preserving rustic roads is an important way to relay the county's history to future generations. The land uses along rustic roads are not expected to significantly change. The significant features of rustic and exceptional rustic roads, the views to adjacent farmlands, rural open spaces, and natural features surrounding the road, and the historic and cultural resources near the road continue to be preserved for county residents and visitors to enjoy and explore. Rustic roads provide a safe and scenic access to existing and future businesses that support agritourism industries such as farm markets, orchards, wineries, and breweries, and farm-to-table businesses that continue to evolve in the rural portions of the county. Except for the northern portion of the Mid-County Game Preserve Road, all the roads in the Rustic Road program are located in the Up-County area. Rustic roads also border 3 municipalities, Gaithersburg, Poolesville, and Brookville, that have independent planning and zoning powers and are not included within county master plans. The segment of the roads that run along the town of Barnesville, which is also has an independent planning and zoning authority, are included in the Rustic Roads program at the request of the town. And this was both in the 1996 plan and with this update.
Just a question on that. The map, you show the green area, which does not necessarily touch Gaithersburg, but you're saying the Rustic Roads area is larger than the green area.
Yes.
Yeah, the rustic roads master plan area is all of Up County and parts of Mid-County that surround Gaithersburg.
So it's
the
beyond this
area is
green,
just
beyond the
ag-
green area.
That's just the ag reserve, we should have pointed that out. This is just to indicate that most of the roads are in the ag reserve, but there are a good number of rustic roads that are not.
Adam, okay, thank you.
Roads designated in the Rustic Roads Program have been determined to be valuable, to have valuable characteristics and are to be preserved under Chapter 49. Article 8 creates two classifications, rustic roads and exceptional rustic roads, and establishes qualifying criteria for each classification. Maintenance practices and improvements must preserve the road's certain significant features. The Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan update has two main purposes. It assesses roads that have been nominated to the program, completes the incomplete descriptions along roads already in the program. The plan also considers reclassification of some existing roads, changes the extents of some rustic roads, and updates existing road descriptions and recommends changes to their significant features. The Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is a key stakeholder in the Rustic Roads program as defined by county code. This plan update could not have been completed without without the assistance of the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. Current and former RRAC members reviewed existing and new road profiles to make suggested edits on changed or missing features, and most importantly, contributed to the traveling experience section for nearly 50 roads, as well as revisions to a few more. Planners also coordinated with the Montgomery County Department of Transportation, the Montgomery County Office of Agriculture, to refine recommendations in this plan. The planning team made presentations to various stakeholder groups over the course of the plan update. Additionally, an online feedback map was also used to solicit comments on existing and nominated roads. The Rustic Roads program intersects with several other plans, programs, and policies. Concepts from Thrive Montgomery 2050, such as complete communities, for example, includes continued development in existing rural villages, some which are served by rustic roads. All updates to the Rustic Roads program also update the master plan of highways and transitways. The bicycle master plan, the pedestrian master plan, Vision Zero, and complete streets may cause changes to rustic roads, such as actions to prevent roadway departures, the provision of bicycle facilities, sidewalks, and safer trail crossings, the creation of safer routes to schools, and other improvements to lighting and road markings. Many sites along rustic roads have been added to the master plan for historic preservation and are in the locational atlas and are described in the text of the road profiles and shown on the maps for those profiles. Two Maryland scenic byways pass through Montgomery County. One is the CNO Canal, which follows along 14 rustic roads. Additionally, 5 rustic roads connect the byways to the CNO Canal along a series of lock roads. Each road profile contains historic information about the roads and the sites along the roads, including details about early inhabitants. The new histories written for roads designated without descriptions and for newly nominated roads provided an opportunity to bring forward underrepresented themes and communities and to utilize knowledge gained through historic preservation research projects completed since the original plan's adoption. New histories highlight themes of women's history, African American individuals and communities, and social activism, and create opportunities for more people to see themselves and their communities reflected in these roads. Planning staff also reviewed existing road descriptions and flagged profiles for potentially dated language. Updates were made to ensure that the language around difficult subjects align with guidance issued by the National Park Service and leading history institutions. The Rustic Roads Functional Master Plan does not include any recommendations that would lead to significant change to population or vehicle miles traveled. This means that the changes to the carbon emission are impossible to measure using current modeling tools. However, preserving rustic roads as safe bikeways may contribute to improving air quality and climate protection in a limited way. Although several important natural features have been designated significant features of some rustic roads or have been highlighted as part of the traveling experience, this plan update adds an environmental section to all rustic road profiles to provide greater detail regarding the surrounding natural features. As rustic roads are being maintained or serviced, care must be given to preserving the character of the landscape elements along them. These features include the narrowness of the road, the natural drainage along roads, and the preservation of landscape elements along the road. Many of the bridges on rustic roads have been identified as significant features. Generally, the design is far more attractive and more appropriate to this type of road than new construction would be. Bridges designs that are aesthetically acceptable and allow for the movement of agricultural equipment and vehicles are needed along rustic roads. And this is the completion of the introductory section, so if you have any questions.
Any comments from the board?
Why don't you start, because I have a bunch.
Yeah, I just, one of the things that has come up, the farm equipment, there's some concern of the farm equipment owners that they are prohibited in some of it in terms of the tree overhang. And was that something that has been looked at? And that's one thing that has come up. I know the farm community is trying to survive in there, and that was one of the things that they have concern about, some of the overhang of the, and whether that can be adjusted to meet that particular need. That's kind of one of my comments, yeah.
Sure. We did meet with members of the Ag Reserve to discuss that information.
Okay.
And to look at ways what can be improved along the roads. And so yes, we try to, in our implementation steps,
Yeah.
provide some implementation guidance as to how to maintain the road so that
Great. That's part of it, is sustaining the farming community.
Right,
And
to
again,
be
if
able to
equipment
move.
is down, then it can affect their operation. I appreciate that comment on it. The other one, I guess, as I recall, back in the 30s, was get the farmers out of the mud. So there was, sometimes if there was no volume, you do a one-lane road, and just as two vehicles may have come, they would go on. So the state put in, there was a delegate, Schmelzer, so it was called schmelzerizing, which was base widen and resurface. And I see that's done some places in the county where they have tried to do that. Sometimes it was maybe a state road, but the funding that came out allowed to do that. The other thing is maintenance of that. Maintenance is an issue. Obviously, it's an impact on MCDOT to maintain some of those. You mentioned reclassification, but again, the earlier meeting we had about Forest Glen, the speed of the roadway and the biking on the roadway is something that is being looked at, and maybe better defining that. I don't know whether a sign that says this is a reasonably used bikeway connection, and just alerting motorists that speed is a consideration. And then I think you mentioned the state highway. I was involved at MDOT and worked with State Highway. We did the first designated historic or rustic roads in the state. So we do get some funding from the state from time to time, or not, for this program to us? Is they distribute some monies to individual counties, or?
we're not specifically aware one way or the other regarding that.
Okay.
Funding.
All right,
for that.
whether that would help our program. I don't know whether the state has a program to support scenic roads, and whether there are funds that could be available from the state. And the last question, anything in this, the White's Ferry issue, nothing on our side necessarily prevents the operation of the White's Ferry from a rustic road standpoint?
I don't believe that anything would
Okay.
inhibit that.
Yeah, there's an issue of eminent domain to get better access on the Virginia side, but, and you're right about there's a national committee on the Potomac River, so that's also something that's consulted on that. Okay, appreciate it.
For White's Ferry, there is a recommendation that if it does go back into operation and the number of vehicles served increases substantially, then we would have to re-examine the status of that portion of White's
Yeah,
Ferry Road as
right,
rustic.
out of
But,
Poolsville.
currently, even when the ferry was in operation, the traffic counts weren't so high as to cause concern.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things there is that there's an incentive for Montgomery County people, maybe they're out in that area, but going over to Virginia to shopping, so that's an advantage to them. But coming the other way, people in Loudoun County are getting to jobs in Montgomery County, and I think that's kind of the movement is jobs coming, getting to jobs from the Loudoun and going the other way to entertainment or stores and things that are in Loudoun County. So, yeah, it seems to be vital. There are issues with the Potomac River Commission, by county commission or by state commission. So, good. Well, thank you.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a couple. I'm going to start first with format a little bit. I mean, you didn't really talk about it, but it's in the table of contents. It helps in that regard. My first question is the specific outreach that's in the plan. I mean, I was looking at the Carter Forward plan, for example, and that has it in the acknowledgments as opposed to in the body of the plan itself. So just a question as to why, why outreach, and is it something that really needs to go into the body of the plan, or whether it should be an appendix or an acknowledgement or something like that, just to just keep the plan from being bogged down with information that as people move forward may not be necessary. That's just, I'm not going to, it's not a big deal for me, but I just wanted to raise it. But when we talk about outreach with the, specifically dealing with the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, or the RAC, periodically in the plan, it talks about the RAC, but it also is the outreach, for example, to the Department of Transportation separately, and the Office of Agriculture. Well, I understand that there are several representatives from both of those organizations, both the Department of Transportation, I think there's at least two, and the Office of Agriculture. There are several members that are representing those bodies on the RAC. So the question is, when you get your comments from the RAC and then go to those organizations that already have a say in the RAC, are you undermining or minimizing the impact of the RAC's comments because you're going back to organizations that have representatives that are already speaking? So I'm a little bit concerned about the interplay. And so I would like to understand why it's necessary, since you have members representing those organizations, then going back to them after you've gotten comment from the RAC, so that they get so those particular representatives get it seems like a higher level of say than other members of the RAC. So that's one of the things that concerns me. If you want to answer these questions as we go along, or would you just like me to
Well, the MCDOT has a staff coordinator that works with the committee, but they are not a voting member. They're not actually a member of the RAC. They just coordinate the meetings and compile the notes and coordinate meetings with developers, or when there's improvement projects along the road, they'll reach out to the committee, but they're not members of the committee. And again, the Office of Agriculture does not have a representative on the committee. There are farmer members of the committee that could also have discussions with the Office of Agriculture as farmers, but they do not have a member. There is one member that is specified as needing to represent, what was the organization called that? The agricultural.
Montgomery Agricultural Producers, Bob Sissel, who
No,
are
no,
we?
there's another county group, but you can't be on two county commissions at the same time.
But the Office of Agriculture is not. I mean, I think that I'm just concerned about the dilution of the impact from other members, because you're going to organizations that actually appoint or have named people that serve in both capacities. So if you could kind of give me a little later at some point, I'd like to understand that a little bit better, because I do know that that's a concern that I would have if I were a member of the RAC, that someone who's already a member or participates has some say. Then if they don't agree with what the rest of the committee says, they can go back and try to overturn that or have an influence after the fact. When, that I think that hurts the strength of the advisory committee. And so in that regard, I also am aware, and I want to make sure that you all are taking that into account, is that in the road code discussions, I know that the RAC has asked for a change in their membership in somewhat, to either add members or, put particular people in. So make sure that the plan doesn't conflict, the language in the plan that discusses the RAC doesn't conflict with what that ultimate decision of the council might be that could change the membership of the RAC. It's just cleanup. And that's consistent with, that ties into some other concerns I have. Throughout the document, there are recommendations that are already, and we'll go to that as we get to the recommendations, but just keep in mind that there are recommendations that are duplicative of existing law, and I have concerns generally that when you duplicate or you say something in a plan and then it's in the law, it could create conflict. So I want to make sure that those are cleaned up and there's no concern about potential conflicts, because you have a plan that might say one thing, and then if the law changes, what does that do? And you want to make sure that we're clear there. So that was one.
Commissioner?
Yeah. Sure.
Sorry, just one thing. I have gotten a question or two. When you say RAC, you mean the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee?
Advisory
I
Committee.
just wanted
RAC.
to clarify for the record. I didn't mean to break your stride.
Yes. Yeah, I'm just trying to. So I'm
Yeah,
not
and just
tongue-tied
really
on that.
quickly, jumping back to your initial question about order, we reached out to multiple stakeholders multiple times as we went through various iterations of the plan. Our Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, obviously with this plan, is one of our primary stakeholders, and so they saw all of the comments incorporated before producing this draft. So in terms of order, it was layered. There was outreach with many different groups over the course of drafting this plan. So
Yeah, and
I don't think it
I don't know what you
undermines
mean by when you say the order.
Well, it sounded like we were. Maybe I misunderstood the question early on, but it sounded like you were concerned that we met with Rustic Roads first and then met with other organizations, and
But
therefore
it talks,
did we
that's what
undermine?
it says in the plan.
Yeah.
It says that you met with that it's not just meeting with them, but when you seek their advice on things in the future, it talks about reaching out to the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, and then also reaching out to DOT and reaching out to the Department of Agriculture. And I want to make sure there's no conflict or undermining the strength of the advisory committee and what it was intended to serve.
Let me just step in and say that, again, I want to reiterate, there is no voting member of the Department of Transportation on the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. They are staffed by the Department of Transportation, but there is no voting member. And I believe that's also true of the Office of Agriculture. There is no voting member of the Office of Agriculture on the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. There are farmers representing other agricultural groups, but in terms of the county staff that is implementing various programs, whether it be DOT or Office of Agriculture, they do not have voting members on the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee. So as with all of our master plans, we feel it's very important to speak to all stakeholders, including our colleagues in other agencies who are tasked with ultimately implementing any master plans that we approve. And that it's not a matter of giving one group greater weight than another. It's really a matter of coordinating both with the appointed bodies like the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee, but also with the county agencies that are tasked with implementation. So we talk to everyone, I guess is the point.
Right, and I guess, let me clarify, though. There's difference between policy and implementation. And perhaps that's where I'm getting, and that's part of the confusion that I'm having when you look at the format of the plan, because the draft as it appears has kind of stuck policy recommendations into the implementation section. So perhaps if you were to change and make sure that the policy recommendations come up front in the document, front and center. It's the one, I think it was 1 through 24 listed in those. Those are policy recommendations that I think really need to go at the beginning of the document and perhaps even before the road recommendations, because the road recommendations would come from those policy recommendations. And then if you take it out of the implementation, that might be a little bit clearer that the outreach to those county agencies is in order to get the implementation done, not necessarily about establishing policy. Is that clearer? Yes. Okay, great. And then I wanted to just comment on the equity section, that I appreciate the diversity of thought rather than just the outreach and talking about bringing in the history of, for example, some of the cemeteries, some of the African-American historic communities, et cetera. I think that's a great opportunity. One of the really, there's a language issue in there that I'm really concerned about it when you get to bridges, specifically in, I think it's on page 18. One of the things that I'll quote, it says significant features must be preserved, but then you talk about replacement. You use the word replaced, about bridges being replaced. The word replaced does not belong in this plan as far as I'm concerned. You could talk about preservation, you could talk about rehabilitation or restoration. Those are words that through the Department of Interior have been established for what you do in a historic document, in a document with historic features that need to be preserved. I don't think so. Anywhere the word replaced comes in, I think that ends up flies in the face of what the intent of the plan is, which is to preserve and maintain these. So I really would like to see that language corrected and the word replace come out. Let's see what else. I think
some of these are going to come up when we talk about the implementation section and when we talk about each of these sections. So maybe we should go on to the next section and continue on, because I think these are very important comments. It does come
in the bridges section, which is in the beginning. I think the word replaced is in there, so I'd really like to see that gone. Thank you.
Please continue.
For the record, Jamie Pratt with Up County Planning. So the road recommendations chapter begins with a description of the definition of what a rustic or exceptional rustic road is, as defined in county code. Rustic roads are narrow, low-volume roads where natural, agricultural, and/or historic features are prominent. These roads have outstanding natural features along their edges, have vistas to farm fields, rural landscapes, or buildings, and provide access to historic resources and landscapes. But rustic roads must be safe for vehicles and pedestrians. A road may not be classified as rustic if function or safety is significantly impaired. An exceptional rustic road is, first of all, has to be classified as rustic, meet all those criteria, but it also needs to meet all three of the following criteria. It must contribute significantly to the natural and agricultural or historic characteristics of the county. It has unusual features found on few other roads, and it would be more negatively affected by improvements or modifications.
So, how common, just following, the issues in Florida where bridges and things go out. In terms of a storm or a hurricane coming up, eliminating a bridge, there might be an issue in replacing it. If you had a rural road which does allow two-way traffic and you have a bridge that's only one lane, there would be some conflict of, say, MCDOT or the state, and more MCDOT, but just replacing the bridge where an issue, it's a new bridge and is not met to general standards. We got 3 lawyers here, but that may be an issue where you may want to modify the bridge a little bit to meet safety requirements. So that's not, you wouldn't totally replace what's there at the moment. Obviously, the rustic preservation is important, but I think from a safety standpoint, the MCDOT or the state might want to maybe make modifications to the bridge or replacement bridge.
I believe, if I could.
Yeah, sure. I'll defer
That
to
would
you.
be reconstruction, as the Department of Interior talks about reconstruction. Okay. I think that what I was getting at is replacement is a term that's not used as part of this. Reconstruction might work, but then, because you're talking about, reconstructing it as it's.
I'm saying, if it's.
I just want to be clear that we're not
if
talking
it's-
about changing.
Well, if it's there, you leave it be, maintain it as much as possible, but if it was a hurricane washout situation, I think you'd be a little conflicted. Do we absolutely put what was there, might be a little narrow bridge, or do we make it reasonably accommodating of farm
we've
traffic, et cetera?
had that actual situation happen.
Okay.
The Montevideo Road Bridge is essentially a one-lane bridge. It did, many years ago, wash out during a bad weather situation. And the decision was made to actually replace it with stronger structural members, but basically pretty much replace it exactly in the same width and configuration. And it really has to do with, how much traffic is on that road, how many people really use it. Is it a safety issue if it's a very, very, very low volume road to have a narrow bridge? And the decision, because it is an exceptional rustic road in that area, it was to essentially restore it.
Okay.
And it did mean putting in some stronger structural members and stronger posts or pillars to support the bridge, but the bridge itself is still a narrow one-lane bridge.
Okay, and so that there was no challenge on the liability of doing that, so that just maybe that needs to be codified in the document.
Yep.
That you can do that.
Yep.
Please continue.
In the road profiles, we have little added symbols to each road profile to indicate what has changed in this plan versus any prior plans that the roads may have been in. All of the recommendations for all of the roads are included in one chapter so that we could keep the road profiles as kind of like the final approved road profile without the various recommendations that led to that point, so that it can be used as a reference in the future for what was actually approved about that road. So you can see here the previous page, the various symbols used and the numbers of roads in each category that this applies to. So we do have 17 nominated roads that we are recommending as rustic. And then we have 24 of the roads that have new road profiles that are already existing rustic roads, but they did not have complete profiles. So out of the 115 total roads, after the approval of this plan, there will be 115 total rustic roads, up from a current 99. And so that includes 79 rustic, 26 exceptional rustic, and then 10 roads that have segments that are both. And then we have 8 roads that are not recommended as rustic. 6 of those are nominated roads, and 2 are existing rustic roads that we're recommending be removed from the program.
Your last comment, then, was there changes in the zoning activity, or what was the reason to take them out?
They're both of them have a kind of a suburban, more of a suburban neighborhood character than when they were originally approved. There was development activity that has occurred along them that has slowly kind of eroded the character of those roads. In one case, Link Road, the entire road was reconstructed except for the very end where it gets really rustic looking. And then MCDOT determined that that portion was actually a private driveway. So the most interesting part of that road was not a public road and therefore could not be rustic. So we have determined that the rest of the road doesn't have enough left on its own to continue being rustic.
Right. Good, thank you.
And there's a rather lengthy table in the plan that shows the summary of the criteria evaluation. So as you can see, there are 6 criteria for a rustic road and then 3 more that must be met for an exceptional rustic road. So this table is kind of a traditional table in all the rustic road plans and in the area master plans that have added roads. They show which of the criteria of county code are met to show that they do qualify as rustic. And along with this, because the code requires that the roads be low volume roads and that they have crash history can't indicate that the roads are unsafe. We did do an analysis starting with the traffic counts. In the 1996 plan, the guidance that they were using was about 3,000 workday trips per, average annual daily traffic. But the old guidance was workday specific. The numbers we had more readily available were just average across all weekdays, not just the work days. But the numbers are fairly similar. So the list on the right is existing rustic roads. You'll see that a couple of them have fairly high counts, but the first one, Frederick Road in Hyattstown, is in a historic district. In the 1994 plan, named this one of the first rustic roads in order to maintain the 2-lane width in Hyattstown, and they recommended a bypass and closing the exit at 109 on 270 and moving it further north to siphon off most of the traffic that's going through Hyattstown. The ones on the left were the nominated rustic roads. It turns out that the 5 most heavily trafficked roads that we looked at, none of them are actually recommended as rustic for various reasons, not including, sometimes including the traffic, but sometimes for other reasons. So then we looked at all the crashes. We took the information we mapped all 67,000 crashes that occurred in a 6-year period and created this heat map to show, where there's more traffic, obviously there's going to be more crashes. The darker lines on this map are the rustic roads, and you'll see that the rustic roads are not in the areas where the county experiences most crashes. But then we made another heat map to show just the crashes along rustic roads, comparing them to each other. Are there particularly troublesome areas to look at? And then we took it down one more level where we only looked at the crashes that didn't occur at intersections, because it turns out when the crashes are on the intersections, it's usually with a non-rustic road that has a higher traffic volume. So there may be some improvements that need to be made to the intersection, but the road itself doesn't have a problem.
One question, when you say Brookville Road, the Brookville bypass is coming in. When you looked at the state's priority funding area, the area to the west of that was developed homes, and the Brookville area itself was not in. But the area where the road was proposed was kind of a dip down because there was nothing there. It was not in the priority funding area. That kind of delayed the project for a while. So when you say Brookville Road, what part is in the rustic roads, or is any of it?
It's from 108 to 97 is currently a rustic road, but there is a new roundabout being built as part of the Brookville bypass.
Bypass, yeah.
So we're recommending that the rustic designation end at the roundabout now and not include a small segment between current 97 and the roundabout, because they're going to have to reconstruct that. There's a stream crossing there, so by the time they're finished with the roundabout and reconstructing the road between the roundabout and Old 97, we don't think it will be rustic anymore.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
But everything to the west of that roundabout is the part of Brookville Road that is recommended to remain rustic.
All right, good, thank you.
Mr. Pratt, I wanted to ask you, 3 slides back, looking at the 2 tables, did I misunderstand you? Is Buck Lodge not being recommended, or is it just the 4 above it?
They're just the 4 above it
Okay,
are not
all right,
recommended,
got
but
it.
Buck
I
Lodge
thought I heard you say
is.
5. Okay.
Just wanted to show the numbers in relation to each other.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
And so we have linked to the crash analysis on the website and the files that were included in the packet for the board. There's one map for each rustic road, as well as a lengthy analysis section that tries to sum up the findings. But I wanted to show a couple of examples of how the intersection crashes might affect something. So if you look on the left, there's Emery Church Road. And Emery Church Road, according to the chart, had 41 crashes along it in the 6-year period. So that seemed like a lot for a kind of short road. And then we mapped where the crashes were, and it turns out that all but one is at the intersection with George Avenue. And there was 1 crash on Emery Church Road in a 6-year period. So the road itself is not unsafe, but the intersection is unsafe. So we don't think that intersection problems should prevent a road from being named rustic if all the improvements that need to be made are at the intersection. On the right, on the other hand, is Game Preserve Road, where it had 71 crashes, but 34 of them, so more than half, or about half, were actually in various places along the road. So this would be an instance where you might want to take a closer look at where those crashes are occurring and perhaps figure out why to make changes. Some traffic calming measures might be needed on a road like this, even though it's rustic, to improve the safety.
Mr. Pratt, I think this example of Game Preserve Road, I'm very familiar with this road. So there's a couple of things here, and I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't know if the traffic calming is really the concern. It's the actual speed at which people are traveling, and at some points along this road, it's barely one lane. There is what I would call a jackknife turn at one point where drivers are told to wait and watch to see if there's traffic coming in the opposite direction. And oftentimes drivers don't pay attention to that, so there's the possibility of conflict there. There is another area along the Seneca underpass of 270 that's also very narrow, and there's residents that live along that area that are constantly asking drivers to slow down. So I don't know, I hear what you're saying, but I think it's more than just traffic calming. It's the topography, and it's actually the layout of the road. And both of these instances, both Emory Church as well as Game Preserve Road, they're used as bypasses. Emory Church, so that people can get to 115. A lot of this traffic that we're seeing at Emory Church and Georgia Avenue is people who are trying to get to the ICC or get further down on Georgia. As far as Game Preserve, it's an alternative from driving all the way around Seneca Creek State Park and taking Middlebrook Road and then trying to get to North Frederick Avenue.
Well, this Emory Church Road is different from Emory Lane, which is just slightly further to the south. So Emory Church Road kind of dead ends, so it's not a cut-through road.
Thank you,
It
Mr.
only
Pratt,
serves,
for the correction. You're absolutely right, but the reason is still because of the people going down on Georgia Avenue
yeah,
south
absolutely.
to ICC.
So, as stated before, there is a recommendation for each road that's either been nominated for or currently in the program in the individual road recommendations section. And so we use these, we did not have them in the working draft, but the public hearing draft will have these symbols added to the recommendation section to indicate what the recommendations are, so you can easily find the new roads or the roads that are having their status changed from rustic to exceptional rustic, for instance, or the ones that are not recommended. And so we've come to another chapter break. If you guys have specific questions about the recommendations chapter.
Do we have some comments here?
Yeah, I don't have a question. I have more of a comment. As far as the road profiles are concerned and the recommendations for changes or additions, I'd simply ask that if between the public hearing, I'm not going to suggest any changes to these for the public hearing draft, but I would ask that if you could perhaps between the public hearing and when we start our work sessions, if you could arrange a tour of those roads that are in dispute. In other words, if there's either testimony that is different than what the staff recommendation is, in that regard, I mean, I don't think we need to go see every single rustic road, but those that are in dispute or that there's a decision that we're going to need to make that would be potentially where we have different opinions or different concerns, I would like to have a tour of those so that we have a better idea of what the differences are.
I think it's a great idea.
A physical tour or a virtual tour?
I would like a physical tour because I
Physical
think
tour.
when you're talking about rustic roads,
You need to feel the
you really
space.
need to feel the space, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Agreed. I think we can arrange a bus tour. That sounds like a great idea. Thank you.
Excuse me. So with the road profiles, all the roads recommended as rustic or exceptional rustic are included in a separate plan appendix. The complete text for each profile is an essential part of the description of the rustic road. The various sections of the of the road profile should all be taken together to form a complete picture of the road. Roads that are not recommended as rustic or exceptional rustic do not have a road profile. The profiles in this plan are based on the 1996 plan with the addition of an environmental section and the renaming of the driving experience to a travel experience in order to note that there are multiple ways a rustic road can be experienced. And these are just images of the profiles, the maps, and the photos. And we're still in the process of adding photos to each of the profiles. So that's an ongoing process. And now we're at roadway and bike classifications. Road classification tables are provide the roadway designation, limits, and minimum right-of-way widths for all rustic and exceptional rustic roads. Road classification tables also provide the designation of the portion of the roads that were analyzed and determined to not be a part of the rustic roads program. 3 roads have recommendations from the bicycle master plan. The bikeway table in the plan provides the type of bikeway recommendations and the extent for those recommendations. And if you have any questions here at this point, do any of the commissioners have any questions?
Any other comments or questions from the board as we move forward? Please continue.
Sure. And now we're at implementation and next steps. Regardless of their classification, roads in the county must be maintained in a manner that provides safe travel for all modes. Additionally, many roads in the up-county area, and more specifically in the agricultural reserve, need to provide for the adequate movement of farm equipment.
I think that was my earlier question was on that, so good to see that.
And this chapter contains recommendations and suggested next steps to ensure the continued successful implementation of the programs in accordance with county code. The Rustic Roads Advisory Committee is a county executive agency group that has a special role in overseeing the Rustic Roads program. The roles and duties of the RAC are outlined in Chapter 49, Article 8. And we wanted to make sure that the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee will continue to carry out these duties in coordination with other stakeholders to protect the rustic roads and their features. And here, the goals of this section are to provide recommendations that will continue to implement the Rustic Roads program in accordance with county code and coordination with other programs and stakeholders. The section of this chapter were derived from comments planners heard from the RAC, county agencies, and from the public. The implementation section provides recommendations regarding the various sections. One thing that we wanted to point out is in the Rustic Roads program is comprised of many intersecting regulations and agencies that all must work together to ensure the program's success. The continued successful implementation of the program is dependent on coordination and cooperation between the stakeholders in both the public and private sector. To better facilitate cooperation, stakeholder groups should consider meeting on a regular basis, perhaps quarterly or biannually, to discuss how to best implement the Rustic Roads program. So that's where we wanted the coordination between the various groups.
At that point, what if we have a specific development that comes into us and it's on adjacent to or nearby a rustic road? Is there any referral then from our standpoint?
Yes, you all just recently had a conditional use application that you were commenting on, and there was a great deal of coordination with comments from the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee presented to the board, with coordination with Montgomery County DOT, and it ultimately led you to not support that particular conditional use application, and your recommendation was upheld by the hearing examiner.
Should that kind of statement be put into this, that there is that ability?
I think
Or is
maybe, and you'll have to see if it's captured by another of the recommendations, but I think it is important, if it's not, to note somewhere in here that the rustic roads status is an important part of the regulatory review process.
All right.
And when a case comes up for regulatory review, the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee and all stakeholders need to be
I think that would be good.
involved.
Good,
If
thank you.
that's not stated explicitly, I think it probably should
Good.
be.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments? I had a couple of comments, but
Are we going to go through the
are we finished with this, or?
Yeah, we don't have the individual recommendations on slides, so this is just a summary of the sections that they're categorized under.
So maybe we go through each individual recommendation, however you want to. I'm assuming we're going to go through each one, or whatever.
No, we could do that, starting on page 86 of the document is where the first recommendations are, and I think that might be helpful because there are 24 recommendations that aren't related to historic preservation specifically. And if some of these recommendations, as was discussed earlier, seem to be more policy than implementation, we'd love to get your input on that to know which ones maybe should be moved earlier in the document and which ones should stay later in the document.
Great.
You want to pull those up? Can you do that? Can you pull it up on the screen so that each recommendation, as we talk about it, so that people know what we're,
And just for folks
the
following
public knows
along,
what
we're
we're
looking
talking about
at
and they can follow along.
page 86, recommendation number 1.
Yeah, if anyone has a paper copy, it's page 86, but we'll see if we can pull up the electronic copy.
It's 92 is on the, I think, online. But I don't know. I'm using an iPad.
Yeah, I love that we're doing everything electronically, but times like this, it's nice to have a paper
Paper.
copy to actually refer to.
Which
86 has recommendations.
Okay, so the first recommendation is just that the main stakeholder groups meet more often. A lot of the issues that came up seemed to be because each group was kind of working on their own, but they weren't coming together to really hash out issues, so they just kind of tended to linger, and we'd hear the same thing about clearing vegetation or widening the roads or things like this that we thought if there were more regular discussions between the major stakeholder groups, that they could come to understanding of how they could all agree on how to fix a certain issue instead of just bringing it up year after year.
So isn't the Rustic Roads Advisory Committee subject to open meetings?
Yeah.
So wouldn't you know, I mean, are we talking about doing something like a development review committee type of
No, I think
arrangement,
it's
or?
more like how the planning board, at least before the pandemic, annually met with the Board of Education and talked about, you know, shared goals, or annually met with the Board of Appeals, or annually met with the Historic Preservation Commission to sort of talk through issues. I think it's, you know, like either a biannual or some sort of regular coordination so that the groups can actually not talk about like a specific case, but sort of talk more broadly about goals.
That seems to me to be a policy issue as opposed to implementation. Because you're guiding basically how the meetings would occur, that you recommend additional meetings between the rest, you know, for stakeholders. I mean, I don't know that. I'll leave that to you. It could be either way.
Okay. Second one?
This is about maintenance improvements along the road, so to ensure that the significant features are respected, but to also ensure that there are safe sight lines and safe passage for vehicles. And we do mention including farm equipment. And we talk about, when we met with folks from the agriculture, they were saying that the pruning of the trees should be at about 17 feet to allow for equipment to easily pass
Yeah, that's
without damaging.
one of the first things I heard prior to coming on to this group.
Right.
Yeah, that was a concern, and I'm glad you mentioned that.
This appears to be implementation, but I know we have some comments on this one.
Actually, I have this. It's actually the same comment on 2, 3, 5, and 6. Is that I just want to have some reference because each of these, I believe, are already set forth in either the code, in a regulation, or a guideline. So I just think there should be some reference that clarifies that it's, in addition to the plan, that something that says consistent with, you know, the law, regulation, or guideline that applies, so that it's not confusing. That it's
So
just
it's more specific
Yeah.
to the standard itself.
Right. That's what I'm looking for. I don't want any conflict to appear between the plan and the
Right,
and the
to
actual.
reference
Right.
that section.
Yes, that was, and I had one other comment if we get to number 5, but that's, if we want to move down, unless anybody has
Any other comments for those sections, so we can move to 5?
Is there anything on number 4?
No.
I don't know which the total numbers are, but the Maryland Scenic Byways, I know you mentioned the state of Maryland. They do have this program of designation, but again, sometimes roads would trade, when I was at MCDOT, we would trade roads back. If the state made an improvement and, you know, of a road, there might be a remnant that we would assume in the county's program. But again, the issue of, and I know this comes up with the Montrose School, going back and forth right away. Sometimes the state will require a payment to get the right-of-way back. Sometimes they take it, they pay. Sometimes they give it back and they say, well, you got to pay to get it back. So I don't know whether this affects any of the transition of state road to rural roads or rustic roads. That, you know, if it's a historic issue, just, you know, give the land back without requiring compensation. If it's a remnant of a state road that becomes part of a rustic. So something to consider.
Okay. Let's move to 5.
So my comment on 5 is the language that says to the extent practicable. Because the purpose of the plan is to preserve is really to preserve the character of the road. I'm a little bit concerned about it either when it says to extent practicable, but doesn't talk about why the current surface of the road needs to be maintained. So some language in there talking about that it needs to retain the, something at the end you can say while assuring, consistency with the, that it maintains its character. So if you change the surface and that surface addresses the or changes the character of the road, I think that there needs to be a better balance there in that particular language.
Okay. Moving on to, are we okay with 6 and 7? Okay, let's move on to the bridges section. 8 through 12. Any comments from the board?
On 8, that's where I saw the language that says to replace a bridge. So that was that was my concern with using the correct language there that we talked about earlier. I'm not going to reiterate that. And then I have on number 9, what is a significant bridge?
That should just mean when a bridge is a significant feature, so we'll clean up the language.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the rest of the recommendations for bridges? If we can move to drainage. Any comments on number 13? Okay. And we have traffic calming, 14 and 15. Any comments on those? Then moving on to scenic views, 16 and 17.
And we have any application for development, would that be a consideration in the placement of a building or barn or something?
And-
So not to obstruct the scenic view.
This might be the place to actually add that additional recommendation that we talked about how the rustic roads should be considered in the event of any development application. We can come up with some language that better articulates that.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. So if we're okay with 16 and 17, moving to the bicycle master plan, number 18, I think we have a comment on that from Commissioner Rubin.
No, actually on 19, I don't have
19?
anything on 18.
Anyone else on 18? Any comments? Okay, we'll move to number 19.
Okay, so 19, you can actually go back down a little, look at what 18 says, and that needs to go into 19, which is, it talks about retaining the character. Yeah, it says context-sensitive design should be applied to preserve the character of these roads. That language should also be reflected in 19 when it talks about working together to clarify ambiguities arise, to increase safety along our roads. Again, looking at preservation of the character of the roads when undertaking any safety project. I would like to see that language in there as well.
Okay, any other comments on that one? Moving on to number 20. Any comments on that particular one? If not, we can move to the final set under the program awareness section, 21 through 24. Any comments? So I had a general comment because I know
There's another.
there's more, obviously. So with the historic preservation section, and there are a lot of things that are in this portion as well, is that also considered to be part of the implementation part of this plan, or is that just a separate? Because I know sometimes historic preservation is kind of viewed separately. And I say that because I had, for me, the wayfinding, the historic plaques, even the book, should be viewed just as important as the actual rustic road. I mean, that's part of, if we're treating this as a true cultural resource, the other resources associated with preserving the cultural heritage of this area is equally as important, in my view, as maintaining the character of the area. So can we ensure that that portion is also incorporated as an implementation piece? Because and explicitly, because right now it's kind of like I see it as bullets, and maybe this all falls under, it goes from 24 to 25, but I'd like it to be a little bit more explicit, because if we are going to get funding to ensure that we are maintaining this entire network of rustic roads, I would love for it to also include funding for the historic pieces, both the literature as well as like the historic plaques and wayfinding.
This is Casey Roan.
Go ahead.
Is it possible to take because it looks like where it has, I'm just going to use an example, promote awareness of rustic roads as a historic and cultural resource and assets. That's a recommendation to me. So why don't we just take those provisions in the historic preservation section and make those recommendations just like we do? So add to the 24 or 25 recommendations you already have.
Yes.
Make those specific recommendations of the plan, and then you can figure out a way to tie in the specific how to implement those particular recommendations.
It should be on the same level.
But it should be on the same level, right?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Casey Roan, Historic Preservation staff. Thank you for those comments. I think we completely agree, and we've had some further discussions since the draft about how to better integrate those into the list of recommendations. So we'll work on that. Thank you.
It's just, and it's better for funding if we are going to get a funding source. I would like that funding source to cover everything, not just bits and pieces. And I know sometimes the historic elements are an afterthought. And I think for this particular program, I think it's important for it to be as important as everything else, because like I said, it's part of the awareness, it's part of the cultural resource, and it's part of our heritage. So I think it's something that we need to put on the same level. So if you can incorporate that into the draft for the public to comment, I think that would be great. So moving forward, which number are we on now? So we're going through, do we need to go over the historic preservation section? Do you guys want to say anything about that? You're okay with any other comments going forward? We do have, now there is 25 and 26 under plan updates. I don't know if anyone has any comments on those.
I do.
26 was just meant to say, do everything it says up in the historic preservation section, so we'll make it a little more explicit.
Okay, Commissioner Rubin?
I do. On 25B, where it talks about a significant feature has been removed or has been altered to an extent, the road should be reexamined. I guess my question is, does that presuppose removal of a significant feature?
I think it's for significant features that, like if there's a historic house, for instance, that's a significant, or a view of a significant house, a historic house, and then that house gets destroyed somehow, then there's no longer any meaning behind the protecting the significant feature if the significant feature is no longer there.
Okay, can we, what I think I'd like to see, if possible, is make it clearer that if it's that their historical feature is no longer there, why that you got to be. I would rather say that it's not presupposing that we're going to do that, but if it happens under some circumstance that but then I would like to tie that back to the historic preservation aspects, because if there was a significant historic feature there, then perhaps there's another way to address it. If it maybe it doesn't continue as a rustic road, certainly by signage or something that was in the historic preservation provisions, that it can bring it back so that we don't lose the historicity of that particular feature.
So really talking about. Sorry, I was going to jump in really quick. I don't think it's just historic elements. This was, significant features of the road. It could be a curve in the road. It could be some unique feature, not necessarily something that's identified in from a historic preservation standpoint.
Right, I get that, but
Okay.
with that, I'm trying to just figure out maybe just looking at that language a little bit better, clarifying that it's not the intent to remove any of those features, but sometimes they get lost or something
Sure.
in some other capacity, and if appropriate, to try to honor or respect the history, if it's applicable to that change.
I see. Okay.
Okay. Any other comments from the board? Any comments from the staff in general? Anything else in terms of presentation?
Yes, there are a very small.
Sure, please.
Basically, this slide just shows that we are going to be asking for online feedback once this has been approved as the public hearing draft. We already have this road viewer app that Melissa Noakes created for us that shows where all the roads are, and you can, when you click on a road, either by name or clicking on the map, it will bring up the road profile, and then you can also view the recommendations for that road as a separate document. And then you can submit comments, you know, just for that road, if that's the only road you care about, instead of having to wade through a 500-page document to say on page 362, you should probably do this. They can just pull up Greenbridge Road, read through it, and if they have some sort of feedback, then we can just get it directly from here. The form on the left is more for the feedback in general of the items that aren't explicitly about a single road. And so we are, the purpose of this meeting is to request the release of the working draft as the public hearing draft, and also to set the public hearing date. When we came in here, we were hoping for Thursday, November 17th, which is about 6 weeks from today, I think. That gives us enough time to do the required distribution of the plan to the council and executive and libraries. I don't know if enough changes have been recommended here that would delay this.
No, I think we can incorporate the changes quickly and
That would be great.
move forward. Yep.
Yeah. Great.
So
Well,
this is what we're asking you to do, so
and
So-
I'm assuming you don't need a motion.
Do you need a motion?
I believe.
Yeah, I think we do
believe
need
you
a
do-
motion.
We do.
Okay.
So I move to, subject to the changes discussed today, to provide from the working draft, to provide the public hearing draft and set the date for the public hearing for November 17th at 6 p.m.
Is there a second?
Jerry Sishi, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. And we will see everyone at the public hearing. Thank you so much for your work on this. And we actually look forward to the tour as well. So thank you for that. Okay, so do we need a separate item for this, for the closed session, or can we do it on this item? Okay, so we're going to do two separate motions to go into closed session. We can do it back to back, and then after that, we will be adjourned for the day. So I need a motion for the closed session for Bethesda lots 10 and 24 for parks.
I move to go into closed session according to the general provisions article 3-305B3.
Is there a second?
Jerry Sishi, second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 And then I move to follow that with another closed session on the general provisions article 3-305B1 double I.
Is there a second?
Jerry Sishi, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it, and we will be going to that. We're to that adjourned for the day. Thank you so much.